5C Stanley Fischer, Ratna Sahai, and Carlos A. Vey, Modern Hyper and High Inflation's National Bureau of Economic Research, Working Paper 8930. At www.nber.org/papers/W8930。
无请参见 Stanley Fischer、Ratna Sahai 和 Carlos A. Vey 的现代超高和高通胀国家经济研究局工作论文8930，网址为 3w.northbystar.org/papers/w8930。
6. In fact, the United States has had two periods of hyperinflation. During the American Revolution, prices roughly tripled every year from 1777 through 1779. With a pound of butter costing $12 and a barrel of flour fetching nearly $1,600 in revolutionary Massachusetts. During the Civil War, inflation raged at annual rates of 29% in the North and nearly 200% in the Confederacy. As recently as 1946, inflation hit 18.1% in the United States.
事实上，美国曾经历过2次超级通胀。在美国革命期间，从1777年到1779年，价格大约每年翻3倍。1磅黄油的价格为12美元，1桶面粉在革命时期的马萨诸塞州的价格接近1600美元。在内战期间，通胀在北方以 29% 的年率猖獗，在南方则接近 200%。就在1946年，美国的通胀率达到了 18.1%。
7. I am indebted to Lawrence Siegel of the Ford Foundation for this cynical, but accurate, insight. Conversely, in a time of deflation or steadily falling prices, it's more advantageous to be a lender than a borrower, which is why most investors should keep at least a small portion of their assets in bonds as a form of insurance against deflating prices.
7. 我要感谢福特基金会的劳伦斯·西格尔对这个讽刺但准确的见解。相反，在通货紧缩或持续下跌的价格的时期，做出借人比做借款人更有利。这就是为什么大多数投资者应该至少将他们的资产的一小部分保留在债券中，作为对抗价格下跌的一种保险。
8. When inflation is negative, it is technically termed deflation. Regularly falling prices may at first sound appealing, until you think of the Japanese example. Prices have been deflating in Japan since 1989, with real estate and the stock market dropping in value year after year, a relentless water torture for the world's second-largest economy.
8. 当通胀为负时，它在技术上被称为通货紧缩。价格持续下跌，起初可能听起来很吸引人，直到你想到日本的例子。自1989年以来，日本的价格一直在下跌，房地产和股市的价值年复一年地下跌，这对世界第2大经济体来说是无情的水刑。
9. Ibbotson Associates, Stocks, Bonds, Bills, and Inflation, 2003 Handbook, Ibbotson Associates, Chicago, 2003, Table 28. The same pattern is evident outside the United States, in Belgium, Italy, and Germany, where inflation was especially high in the 20th century. Inflation appears to have had a negative impact on both stock and bond markets, note Elroy Dimson. Paul Marsh and Mike Staunton in Triumph of the Optimists, 101 Years of Global Investment Returns, Princeton University Press, 2002, page 53.
9. Ibbotson Associates, 股票、债券、票据和通胀2003年手册 Ibbotson Associates, 芝加哥2003年表2-8。同样的模式在美国以外也很明显。在比利时、意大利和德国，20世纪的通胀特别高，通胀似乎对股票和债券市场都产生了负面影响。Elroy Dimson、Paul Marsh 和 Mike Staunton 在《乐观主义者的胜利：全球投资回报的101年》，普林斯顿大学出版社，2002年，第53页。
10. Thorough, if sometimes outdated, information on REITs can be found at www.nareit.com.
是关于房地产投资信托基金的详尽信息，尽管有时可能过时，可以在 3w.nareit.com 找到。
11. For further information, see www.vanguard.com, www.cohenandsteers.com, www.columbiafunds.com, and www.fidelity.com. The case for investing in a REIT fund is weaker if you own a home, since that gives you an inherent stake in real estate ownership.
11. 更多信息，请参见 3w.vanguard.com、3w.cohenandsteers.com、3w.columbiafunds.com 和3w.fidelity.com。如果你拥有一套房子，那么投资房地产投资信托基金的理由就弱了，因为这已经让你在房地产所有权上有了固有的份额。
12A good introduction to tips can be found at www.publicdebt.trees.gov/ofinflin.htm. For more advanced discussions, see www.feds/pub/feds/200232/200232pap.pdf. www.tiaa-crefinstitute.org publications/restiags/73_09-2002.htm and www.bwater.com/research_ibans.htm。
12关于 tips 的好的介绍，可以在3w.publicdebt.trees.gov/ofinflin.htm 找到。对于更深入的讨论，可以参见3w.federalreserve.gov/top/2002/2023/2002pap.pdf. www.tiaa-crefinstitute.org/publications/restiags/73/09/2002.htm 以及3w.bwater.com/research-ibonds.htm。
13 For details on these funds, see www.vanguard.com or www.fidelity.com.
13关于这些基金的详细信息，请参见3w.vanguard.com 或3w.fidelity.com。
Asterisk, it is said an Eastern monarch once charged his wise men to invent him a sentence, to be ever in view, and which should be true and appropriate in all times and situations. They presented him the words, and this, too, shall pass away. How much it expresses! How chastening in the hour of pride! How consoling in the depths of affliction! And this, too, shall pass away. And yet let us hope it is not quite true. Abraham Lincoln, addressed to the Wisconsin State Agricultural Society, Milwaukee, September 30, 1859, in Abraham Lincoln. Speeches and Writings, 1859 to 1865, Library of America, 1985. Volume 2, page 101.
星号据说一位东方君主曾经命令他的智者为他发明一句话，这句话应该始终在视线之内，并且在所有时期和情况下都应该是真实和适当的。他们给他呈现的词是：这也将过去。他表达了多少？在骄傲的时刻，多么磨砺人心；在深深的痛苦中，多么安慰人心。这也将过去。然而，让我们希望这并非完全正确。亚伯拉罕·林肯1859年9月30日在威斯康星州农业协会的演讲收录在《亚伯拉罕·林肯演讲和著作》1859至1865，美国图书馆1985年第2卷第101页。
Asterisk, earning power is Graham's term for a company's potential profits or, as he puts it, the amount that a firm might be expected to earn year after year if the business conditions prevailing during the period were to continue unchanged. Security Analysis, 1934 edition, page 354. Some of his lectures make it clear that Graham intended the term to cover periods of 5 years or more. You can crudely but conveniently approximate a company's earning power per share by taking the inverse of its price/earnings ratio. A stock with a P/E ratio of 11 can be said to have earning power of 9%, or 1 divided by 11. Today, earning power is often called earnings yield.
星号盈利能力是格雷厄姆对公司潜在利润的称呼，或者正如他所说，如果在该期间的商业条件继续不变，公司可能会年复一年的赚取的金额。证券分析1934年版第354页。他的一些讲座明确表示，格雷厄姆希望这个术语覆盖5年或更长的时间段。你可以粗略但方便地通过取其价格收益比率的倒数来近似计算公司每股的盈利能力。一个 P/E 比率为11的股票可以说有 9% 的盈利能力，或1除以11。今天，盈利能力通常被称为收益率。
Asterisk, this problem is discussed extensively in the commentary on Chapter 19.
星号这个问题在第19章的评论中有详细的讨论。
Asterisk, Graham elegantly summarized the discussion that follows in a lecture he gave in 1972. The margin of safety is the difference between the percentage rate of the earnings on the stock at the price you pay for it and the rate of interest on bonds, and that margin of safety is the difference which would absorb unsatisfactory developments. At the time the 1965 edition of The Intelligent Investor was written, the typical stock was selling at 11 times earnings, giving about 9% return as against 4% on bonds. In that case, you had a margin of safety of over 100%. Now, in 1972, there is no difference between the earnings rate on stocks and the interest rate on stocks, and I say there is no margin of safety. You have a negative margin of safety on stocks. See Benjamin Graham, Thoughts on Security Analysis. Transcript of lecture at the Northeast Missouri State University Business School, March 1972, Financial History, number 42, March 1991, page 9.
星号格雷厄姆在1972年的一次演讲中，优雅地总结了接下来的讨论。安全边际是你为股票支付的价格上股票的收益率与债券的利率之间的差距。这个安全边际就是可以吸收不满意的发展的差距。在《聪明的投资者》1965年版写作时，典型的股票以11倍的收益出售，相对于债券的4%回报率，提供了约9%的回报。在这种情况下，你有超过100%的安全边际。现在，在1972年，股票的收益率和股票的利率之间没有区别。我说没有安全边际，你在股票上有负的安全边际。参见本杰明·格雷厄姆关于证券分析的思考，1972年3月在东北密苏里州立大学商学院的演讲记录，金融历史，1991年3月，第42号，第9页。
Asterisk this paragraph, which Graham wrote in early 1972, is an uncannily precise description of market conditions in early 2003. For more detail, see the commentary on Chapter 3.
星号这一段，格雷厄姆在1972年初写的，是对2003年初市场状况的惊人精确描述。更多细节，请参见第3章的评论。
Asterisk in American roulette. Most wheels include 0 and 00 along with numbers 1 through 36 for a total of 38 slots. The casino offers a maximum payout of 35 to 1. What if you bet $1 on every number? Since only one slot can be the one into which the ball drops, you would win $35 on that slot, but lose $1 on each of your other 37 slots for a net loss of $2. That $2 difference, or a 5.26% spread on your total $38 bet, is the casino's house advantage, ensuring that, on average, roulette players will always lose more than they win. Just as it is in the roulette player's interest to bet as seldom as possible, it is in the casino's interest to keep the roulette wheel spinning. Likewise, the intelligent investor should seek to maximize the number of holdings that offer a better chance for profit than for loss. For most investors, diversification is the simplest and cheapest way to widen your margin of safety.
星号在美式轮盘赌中，大多数轮盘除了1至36的数字外，还包括0和00，总共有38个插槽。赌场提供最高35:1的赔率。如果你在每个数字上都下注$1，会怎样呢？由于只有一个插槽可以是球掉进去的插槽，你会在那个插槽上赢得$35，但在其他37个插槽上每个都会损失$1，净损失$2。这$2的差价，或者说是你总共$38赌注的5.26%的差价，就是赌场的庄家优势，确保了平均来看，轮盘赌玩家总是会输掉比他们赢得更多的钱。正如轮盘赌玩家尽可能少地下注对他们有利一样，对赌场来说，保持轮盘赌转动是对他们有利的。同样，聪明的投资者应该寻求最大化那些提供盈利机会大于亏损风险的持有物的数量。对于大多数投资者来说，多元化是最简单、最便宜的扩大你的安全边际的方式。
Asterisk Graham is saying that there is no such thing as a good or bad stock. There are only cheap stocks and expensive stocks. Even the best company becomes a sell when its stock price goes too high, while the worst company is worth buying if its stock goes low enough.
星号格雷厄姆在说，没有好股票或坏股票，只有便宜的股票和昂贵的股票。即使是最好的公司，当其股票价格过高时，也会变成卖出；而最糟糕的公司，如果其股票价格足够低，也值得购买。
The very people who considered technology and telecommunications stocks a sure thing in late 1999 and early 2000, when they were hellishly overpriced, shunned them as too risky in 2002 even though, In Graham's exact words from an earlier period, the price depreciation of about 90% made many of these securities exceedingly attractive and reasonably safe. Similarly, Wall Street's analysts have always tended to call a stock a strong buy when its price is high, and to label it a sell after its price has fallen, the exact opposite of what Graham, in simple common sense, would dictate. As he does throughout the book, Graham is distinguishing speculation, or buying on the hope that a stock's price will keep going up, from investing, or buying on the basis of what the underlying business is worth.
那些在1999年底和2000年初认为科技和电信股票是稳赚不赔的人，当时这些股票价格高得离谱，他们在2002年却避之不及，认为他们风险过大。尽管正如格雷厄姆在早期的确切话语中，价格下跌约 90%， 使得这些证券极其有吸引力且相当安全。同样，华尔街的分析师总是倾向于在股票价格高时称其为强烈购买，并在价格下跌后将其标记为卖出，这与格雷厄姆和简单的常识所主张的完全相反。正如他在整本书中所做的那样，格雷厄姆正在区分投机，或者是基于股票价格会继续上涨的希望购买，和投资，或者是基于底层业务价值的购买。
Graham uses common stock option warrant as a synonym for warrant, a security issued directly by a corporation giving the holder a right to purchase the company's stock at a predetermined price. Warrants have been almost entirely superseded by stock options. Graham quips that he intends the example as a shocker because, even in his day, warrants were regarded as one of the market's seediest backwaters. See the commentary on Chapter 16.
幸好格雷厄姆将普通股期权凭证作为权证的同义词，权证是公司直接发行的一种证券，赋予持有者以预定价格购买公司股票的权利。权证几乎完全被股票期权取代。格雷厄姆打趣说，他打算将这个例子作为一个惊人之举，因为即使在他的时代，权证也被视为市场上最糟糕的角落之一。参见第16章的评论。
One is recounted by investment consultant Charles Ellis and Jason Zweig, Wall Street's Wisest Man, Money, June, 2001, pages 49 to 52.
一如投资顾问查尔斯·爱丽丝在杰森·茨魏格的《华尔街最明智的人》中所述 ，Money， 2001年6月，第49-52页。
2 JDS Uniphase's share price has been adjusted for later splits.
2 JDS Uniphase 的股价已经调整为后来的拆分。
3 No one who diligently researched the answer to this question and honestly accepted the results would ever have day traded or bought IPOs.
3任何一个认真研究这个问题的答案，并诚实接受结果的人，都不会进行日内交易或购买 IPO。
For Paul Slovic, Informing and Educating the Public About Risk, Risk Analysis, Volume 6, Number 4, 1986, page 412.
斯保罗·斯洛维克关于风险的公众信息和教育风险分析第6卷第4期1986年第412页。
5 The Wager, in Blaise Pascal, Ponce's, Penguin Books, London and New York, 1995, pages 122 to 125. Peter L. Bernstein, Against the Gods, John Wiley and Sons, New York. 1996, pages 68 to 70. Peter L. Bernstein, Decision Theory and Iambic Pentameter, Economics and Portfolio Strategy, January 1, 2003, page 2.
无赌注，在布莱兹·帕斯卡尔《思想企鹅书籍》，伦敦和纽约，1995年，第122-125页。彼得 ·L. 伯恩斯坦，对抗众神，约翰·威利与儿子，纽约，1996年，第68-70页。彼得 ·L. 伯恩斯坦，押韵五音诗中的决策理论，经济与投资组合策略，2003年1月1日，第2页。
The study, in its final form, was Lawrence Fisher and James H. Laurie, Rates of Return on Investments in Common Stock, The Year-by-Year Record, 1926-65, The Journal of Business, Volume 41, Number 3. July, 1968, pages 291 to 316. For a summary of the study's wide influence, see http://library.dfos.com/reprints/work_of_art/.
星号最终形式的研究是劳伦斯·费舍尔和詹姆斯 ·H. 洛里普通股投资的回报率 年度记录1926-65商业杂志第 XLR 卷第3期1968年7月第291-316页。关于该研究广泛影响的总结，请参见 http://library-false.com reprints work art
Asterisk C pages 50 to 52.
星号参见第50-52页。
The price/earnings ratio of a stock, or of a market average like the S&P 500 stock index, is a simple tool for taking the market's temperature. If, for instance, a company earned $1 per share of net income over the past year, and its stock is selling at $8.93 per share, its price/earnings ratio would be 8.93. If, however, the stock is selling at $69.70, then the price/earnings ratio would be 69.7. In general, a price/earnings ratio, or P/E ratio, below 10 is considered low, between 10 and 20 is considered moderate, and greater than 20 is considered expensive. For more on P/E ratios, see page 168.
股票的市盈率或像标准普尔500股票指数这样的市场平均值，是测量市场温度的简单工具。例如，如果一家公司在过去1年中每股净收入为$1，而其股票的售价为每股$8.93，那么其市盈率就是8.93。然而，如果股票的售价为$69.70，那么市盈率就是69.7。一般来说，市盈率或 P/E 比率低于10被认为是低的，10到20之间被认为是适中的，超过20被认为是高的。关于 P/E 比率的更多信息，请参见第168页。
One, if dividends are not included, stocks fell 47.8% in those 2 years.
一，如果不包括股息，那么在这2年中，股票下跌了47.8%。
One, by the 1840s, these indexes had widened to include a maximum of 7 financial stocks and 27 railroad stocks, still an absurdly unrepresentative sample of the rambunctious young American stock market.
一到了1840年代，这些指数已经扩大到包括最多7个金融股和27个铁路股，这仍然是对于那个充满活力的年轻美国股市的一个荒谬的不具代表性的样本。
To see Jason Zweig, New Cause for Caution on Stocks, Time, May 6, 2002, page 71. As Graham hints on page 65, even the stock indexes between 1871 and the 1920s suffer from survivorship bias, thanks to the hundreds of automobile, aviation, and radio companies that went bust without a trace. These returns, too, are probably overstated by 1 to 2 percentage points.
二，参见 Jason Zweig 股票的新警惕因素，时代杂志，2002年5月6日，第71页。正如格雷厄姆在第65页上所暗示的，即使是1871年到1920年代的股票指数也受到了生存者偏差的影响，这要归功于数百家汽车、航空和无线电公司的破产而无影无踪。这些回报率也可能被高估了1到2个百分点。
To those cheaper stock prices do not mean, of course, that investors' expectation of a 7% stock return will be realized.
二，当然，那些更便宜的股票价格并不意味着投资者期望的7%的股票回报率将会实现。
3C Jeremy Siegel, Stocks for the Long Run, McGraw-Hill, 2002, page 94, and Robert Arnott and William Bernstein, The 2% Dilution, Working Paper, July, 2002.
三，参见 Jeremy Siegel 长期持有股票，麦格劳希尔，2002年第94页，以及 Robert Arnott 和 William Bernstein 2个百分点的稀释工作论文，2002年7月。
Asterisk C Graham's conclusion to Chapter 2, pages 56 to 57.
星号参见格雷厄姆对第2章结论的评论，第56-57页。
Asterisk Graham's objection to high-yield bonds is mitigated today by the widespread availability of mutual funds that spread the risk and do the research of owning junk bonds. See the commentary on Chapter 6 for more detail.
星号格雷厄姆对高收益债券的反对意见在今天被广泛可用的互惠基金所缓解，这些基金分散了风险并进行了垃圾债券的研究。关于更多细节，请参见第6章的评论。
The new housing bonds and new community debentures are no more. New Housing Authority bonds were backed by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and were exempt from income tax. but they have not been issued since 1974. New community debentures, also backed by HUD, were authorized by a federal law passed in 1968. About $350 million of these debentures were issued through 1975, but the program was terminated in 1983.
新住房债券和新社区债券已经不存在了。新住房管理局债券由美国住房和城市发展部 HUD 担保，并且免税，但自1974年以来就没有发行过。新社区债券也由 HUD 担保，由1968年通过的一项联邦法律授权。大约有 3.5 亿美元的这些债券在1975年之前发行，但该计划在1983年被终止。
Asterisk a bond's coupon is its interest rate. A low coupon bond pays a rate of interest income below the market average.
星号债券的票面利率是其利率，低票面利率债券支付的利息收入低于市场平均水平。
Asterisk while Graham's logic remains valid, the numbers have changed. Corporations can currently deduct 70% of the income they receive from dividends, and the standard corporate tax rate is 35%. Thus, a corporation would pay roughly $24.50 in tax on $100 in dividends from preferred stock versus $35 in tax on $100 in interest income. Individuals pay the same rate of income tax on dividend income that they do on interest income, so preferred stock offers them no tax advantage.
星号尽管格雷厄姆的逻辑仍然有效，但数字已经改变。公司目前可以扣除他们从股息中获得的 70% 的收入，标准的公司税率是 35%。因此，一个公司大约会在从优先股中获得的100美元的股息上支付 24.50 美元的税，而在100美元的利息收入上支付35美元的税。个人在股息收入上支付的所得税率与他们在利息收入上支付的税率相同，所以优先股对他们没有税收优势。
One for more about the distinction between physically and intellectually difficult investing on the one hand, and emotionally difficult investing on the other, see Chapter 8 and also Charles D. Ellis, 3 Ways to Succeed as an Investor, and Charles D. Ellis and James R. Verton, eds, The Investor's Anthology, John Wiley & Sons, 1997, page 72.
一关于物理和智力投资与情绪投资之间的区别，更多信息请参见第8章，以及 Charles D. Ellis 在 Charles D. Ellis 和 James R. Verton 编著的《投资者选集》John Wiley 与 Sons 1997年第72页的作为投资者成功的3种方式。
A recent Google search for the phrase age and asset allocation turned up more than 30,000 online references.
最近在 Google 上搜索年龄与资产配置这个词组，结果超过3万个在线参考资料。
3 James K. Glassman and Kevin A. Hassett, Dow 36,000. The New Strategy for Profiting from the Coming Rise in the Stock Market. Times Business, 1999, page 250.
3 James K. Glassman 和 Kevin A. Hassett 道琼斯36000，从即将到来的股市上涨中获利的新策略。Times Business, 1999年第250页。
For a fascinating essay on the psychological phenomenon, see Daniel Gilbert and Timothy Wilson's Miswanting at www.wjh.harvard.edu/DEG/Gilbert_and_Wilson, Miswanting.pdf.
4. 对于这种心理现象的一个引人入胜的论文，请参阅 Daniel Gilbert 和 Timothy Wilson 的物想。网址为 www.wjh.harvard.edu.dtg/Gilbert_与/Wilson Miswanting.pdf.
5. For the sake of simplicity, this example assumes that stocks rose instantaneously.
5. 为了简单起见，这个例子假设股票瞬间上涨。
6. For the 2003 tax year, the bottom federal tax bracket is for single people earning less than $28,400 or married people, filing jointly, earning less than $47,450.
6. 对于2003年的税收年度，最低的联邦税收级别是对于单身人士年收入低于28,400美元或已婚人士联合报税年收入低于47,450美元。
7. 2 good online calculators that will help you compare the after-tax income of municipal and taxable bonds can be found at www.investinginbonds.com/cgibin/calculator.pl and www.lebenthal.com/index_infocenter.html. To decide if a muni is right for you, find the taxable equivalent yield generated by these calculators, then compare that number to the yield currently available on Treasury bonds. http://money.cnn.com/markets/bond-center or www.bloomberg.com/markets/c13.html. If the yield on Treasury bonds is higher than the taxable equivalent yield, munis are not for you. In any case, be warned that municipal bonds and funds produce lower income and more price fluctuation than most taxable bonds. Also, the alternative minimum tax, which now hits many middle-income Americans, can negate the advantages of municipal bonds.
其有2个很好的在线计算器，可以帮助你比较市政债券和应税债券的税后收入。可以在 3w.investinginbonds.com/cgi-bin-calculator.pl 和 3w.lebenthal.com/index-infocenter.html 找到。要决定市政债券是否适合你，找出这些计算器生成的应税等效收益率，然后将这个数字与目前国库债券的收益率进行比较。http://money.cnn.com/markets/bondcenter- 或 3w.bloomberg.com/markets/ce3.html。如果国库债券的收益率高于应税等效收益率，那么市政债券就不适合你。无论如何，要警告你，市政债券和基金产生的收入较低，价格波动较大，比大多数应税债券要大。此外，现在影响许多中等收入美国人的替代最低税可能会抵消市政债券的优势。
8. For an excellent introduction to bond investing, see http://flagship.vanguard.com/web/planret/advice.bti-investment-sign-vs-tin-bonds.html#sign-inter-est-rates. For an even simpler explanation of bonds, see http://money.cnn.com/pf/101/lessons/7/. A laddered portfolio, holding bonds across a range of maturities, is another way of hedging interest rate risk.
8. 对于债券投资的优秀介绍，请参阅 http://flagship.vanguard.com/web/planret/advice-bit-investment-sign-vs-tin-bonds.html-interest rates。对于债券的更简单解释，请参阅 http://money.cnn.com/pf/101/lessons-7。一个阶梯式投资组合持有一系列到期日的债券，是对冲利率风险的另一种方式。
9. For more information, see www.vanguard.com, www.fidelity.com, www.schwab.com, and www.tiroprice.com.
久欲了解更多信息，请参阅 3w.vanguard.com、3w.fidelity.com、3w.schwab.com 和 3w.tiroprice.com。
10. For an accessible online summary of bond investing, see www.aai.com promo/20021118/bonds.shtml.
是对于债券投资的易于理解的在线总结，请参阅 3w.aa2.com/promo/20021118/bonds.shtml。
11. In general, variable annuities are not attractive for investors under the age of 50 who expect to be in a high tax bracket during retirement or who have not already contributed the maximum to their existing 401k or IRA accounts. Fixed annuities, with the notable exception of those from TAC or F, can change their guaranteed rates and smack you with nasty surrender fees. For thorough and objective analysis of annuities, see 2 superb articles by Walter Updegrave, Income for Life, Money, July 2002, pages 89 to 96, and Annuity Buyer's Guide, Money, November 2002, pages 104 to 110.
一般来说，对于预计在退休期间处于高税收级别的50岁以下投资者，或者还没有向他们现有的 401k 或 IRA 账户最大限度的贡献的人来说，可变年金并不吸引人。固定年金除了 TIAA-CREF 的那些显著例外，可以改变他们的保证利率，并用严重的退保费打击你。对于年金的深入和客观分析，请参阅 Walter Updegrave 的2篇精彩文章：终身收入 Money 2002年7月第89-96页，以及年金购买指南 Money 2002年11月第104-110页。
12 For more on the role of dividends in a portfolio, see Chapter 19.
12有关股息在投资组合中的作用的更多信息，请参阅第19章。
Asterisk at the beginning of 1949, the average annual return produced by stocks over the previous 20 years was 3.1% versus 3.9% for long-term treasury bonds, meaning that $10,000 invested in stocks would have grown to $18,415 over that period, while the same amount in bonds would have turned into $21,494. Naturally enough, 1949 turned out to be a fabulous time to buy stocks. Over the next decade, the Standard & Poor's 500 stock index gained an average of 20.1% per year, one of the best long-term returns in the history of the U.S. stock market.
星号1949年初，过去20年的股票平均年回报率为 3.1%， 而长期国债为 3.9%。这意味着在那段时间里，投资股票的$10,000会增长到$18,415，而投资债券的同样金额会变成$21,494。自然而然，1949年成为购买股票的绝佳时机。在接下来的10年里，标准普尔500股票指数平均每年增长 20.1%， 这是美国股市历史上最好的长期回报之一。
Graham's earlier comments on this subject appear on pages 19 to 20. Just imagine what he would have thought about the stock market of the late 1990s, in which each new record-setting high was considered further proof that stocks were the riskless way to wealth.
格雷厄姆在此主题上的早期评论出现在第19-20页。试想，他对90年代末的股市会有什么看法？那时每一个创纪录的新高都被视为进一步的证明，即股票是无风险致富的途径。
Asterisk the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed at a then-record high of 381.17 on September 3, 1929. It did not close above that level until November 23, 1954, more than a quarter of a century later, when it hit 382.74. When you say you intend to own stocks for the long run, do you realize just how long the long run can be? Or that many investors who bought in 1929 were no longer even alive by 1954? However, for patient investors who reinvested their income, stock returns were positive over this otherwise dismal period, simply because dividend yields averaged more than 5.6% per year. According to Professors Elroy Dimson, Paul Marsh, and Mike Staunton of London Business School, if you had invested $1 in U.S. stocks in 1900 and spent all your dividends, your stock portfolio would have grown to $198 by 2000. But if you had reinvested all your dividends, your stock portfolio would have been worth $16,797. Far from being an afterthought, dividends are the greatest force in stock investing.
星号道琼斯工业平均指数在1929年9月3日创下了当时的历史最高收盘价 381.17， 直到1954年11月23日，也就是1/4个世纪后，它才以 382.74 的价格收盘，超过了那个水平。当你说你打算长期持有股票时，你是否意识到长期可能有多长？或者许多在1929年买入的投资者在1954年甚至已经去世了。然而，对于那些耐心投资并重新投资收入的人来说，尽管这段时间看起来很惨淡，股票回报仍然是正的，仅仅因为股息收益率平均每年超过 5.6%。根据伦敦商学院的 Elroy Dimson、Paul Marsh 和 Mike Staunton 教授的说法，如果你在1900年投资了$1的美国股票，并花掉了所有的股息，那么到2000年，你的股票投资组合会增长到$198。但是，如果你重新投资了所有的股息，你的股票投资组合的价值会达到$16,797。股息远非是投资股票的附带考虑，而是投资股票的最大驱动力。
Why do the high prices of stocks affect their dividend yields? A stock's yield is the ratio of its cash dividend to the price of one share of common stock. If a company pays a $2 annual dividend when its stock price is $100 per share, its yield is 2%. But if the stock price doubles while the dividend stays constant, the dividend yield will drop to 1%. In 1959, when the trend Graham spotted in 1957 became noticeable to everyone, most Wall Street pundits declared that it could not possibly last. Never before had stocks yielded less than bonds. After all, Since stocks are riskier than bonds, why would anyone buy them at all unless they pay extra dividend income to compensate for their greater risk? The experts argued that bonds would outyield stocks for a few months at most, and then things would revert to normal. More than 4 decades later, the relationship has never been normal again. The yield on stocks has, so far, continuously stayed below the yield on bonds.
为什么股票的高价格会影响其股息收益率？股息收益率是公司现金股息与一股普通股价格的比率。如果一家公司的股票价格为每股100美元，每年支付2美元的股息，那么其收益率为 2%。但是，如果股票价格翻倍而股息保持不变，股息收益率将下降到 1%。1959年，当格雷厄姆在1957年发现的趋势开始为所有人所注意到时，大多数华尔街专家宣称这种情况不可能持续。股票的收益率从未低于债券，毕竟由于股票比债券风险更大，除非他们支付额外的股息收入来补偿其更大的风险，否则谁会购买它们呢？专家们认为，债券的收益率最多只会在几个月内超过股票，然后事情会恢复到正常。然而，40多年后，这种关系从未再次正常，股票的收益率到目前为止一直低于债券的收益率。
*See pages 56 to 57 and 88 to 89.
信号请参阅第56-57页和第88-89页。
For another view of diversification, see the sidebar in the commentary on Chapter 14, page 368.
对于多元化的另一种观点，请参阅第14章评论中的侧边栏，第368页。
Today's defensive investors should probably insist on at least 10 years of continuous dividend payments, which would eliminate from consideration only one member of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, Microsoft, and would still leave at least 317 stocks to choose from among the S&P 500 index. Even insisting on 20 years of uninterrupted dividend payments would not be overly restrictive. According to Morgan Stanley, 255 companies in the S&P 500 met that standard as of year-end 2002.
信号今天的防御性投资者可能应该至少坚持连续10年的股息支付，这将只会排除道琼斯工业平均指数的一个成员微软，并且仍然会留下至少317只股票可以从标准普尔500指数中选择。即使坚持20年的不间断股息支付，也不会过于限制。据摩根士丹利，截至2002年底，标准普尔500指数中有255家公司达到了这个标准。
The rule of 72 is a handy mental tool. To estimate the length of time an amount of money takes to double, simply divide its assumed growth rate into 72. At 6%, for instance, money will double in 12 years. 72 divided by 6 is equal to 12. At the 7.1% rate cited by Graham, a growth stock will double its earnings in just over 10 years. 72 divided by 7.1 is equal to 10.1 years.
72法则是一个方便的心算工具。要估计一笔钱翻倍需要多长时间，只需将其假设的增长率除以72。例如，以 6% 的增长率，资金将在12年内翻倍，72除以6等于12。按照格雷厄姆提到的 7.1% 的增长率，一只成长股将在10年多一点的时间内翻倍其收益，72除以 7.1 等于 10.1 年。
Graham makes this point on page 73.
信号格雷厄姆在第73页上提到了这一点。
To show that Graham's observations are perennially true, we can substitute Microsoft for IBM and Cisco for Texas Instruments. 30 years apart, the results are uncannily similar. Microsoft's stock dropped 55.7% from 2000 through 2002, while Cisco's stock, which had risen roughly 50-fold over the previous 6 years, lost 76% of its value from 2000 through 2002. As with Texas Instruments, the drop in Cisco's stock price was sharper than the fall in its earnings, which dropped just 39.2%, comparing the 3-year average for 1997 to 1999 against 2000 to 2002. As always, the hotter they are, the harder they fall.
为了证明格雷厄姆的观察是永恒的真理，我们可以用微软替换 IBM， 用思科替换德州仪器。相隔30年，结果惊人的相似。微软的股票从2000年到2002年下跌了 55.7%， 而思科的股票在前6年中大约上涨了50倍， 从2000年到2002年失去了76%的价值。就像德州仪器一样，思科的股价下跌幅度比其盈利下跌幅度更大，后者只下跌了 39.2%， 比较1997至1999年与2000至2002年的3年平均值。一如既往，越是炙手可热的，跌得越重。
Asterisk earnings multiplier is a synonym for PE or price/earnings ratios, which measure how much investors are willing to pay for a stock compared to the profitability of the underlying business. See footnote on page 70 in Chapter 3.
星号盈利倍数是 PE 或价格盈利比率的同义词，它衡量的是投资者愿意为一只股票支付的价格与其底层业务的盈利能力之间的比率。参见第3章第70页的脚注。
Investors can now set up their own automated system to monitor the quality of their holdings by using interactive portfolio trackers at such websites as www.quicken.com, minicentral.msn.com, finance.yahoo.com, and www.morningstar.com. Graham would, however, warn against relying exclusively on such a system. You must use your own judgment to supplement the software.
现在投资者可以通过使用交互式的投资组合跟踪器，在诸如 3w.quicken.com、moneycentral.msn.com、finance.yahoo.com 和 3w.morningstar.com 等网站上建立自己的自动化系统，来监控他们的持股质量。然而，格雷厄姆会警告，不要完全依赖这样的系统，你必须使用你自己的判断来补充软件。
Asterisk to update Graham's figures. Take each dollar amount in this section and multiply it by 5.
星号要更新格雷厄姆的数据，取本节中的每一个美元金额并乘以5。
Asterisk in today's markets, to be considered large, a company should have a total stock value, or market capitalization, of at least $10 billion. According to the online stock screener at http://screen.yahoo.com/stocks.html, that gave you roughly 300 stocks to choose from as of early 2003.
星号在今天的市场中要被认为是大公司，公司的总股票价值或市场资本化应至少为100亿美元。根据 http://screen.yahoo.com/stocks.html 网站上的在线股票筛选器，截至2003年初，你大约有300只股票可以选择。
First Peter Lynch with John Rothschild, One Up on Wall Street, Penguin, 1989, page 23.
伊彼得·林奇与约翰·罗斯柴尔德，华尔街上的一步之遥，企鹅，1989，第23页。
2 Kevin Landis interview on CNN and the Money, November 5, 1999, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. If Landis's own record is any indication, focusing on the things that you know is not all you really need to do to pick stocks successfully. From the end of 1999 through the end of 2002, Landis's fund, full of technology companies that he claimed to know firsthand from his base in Silicon Valley, lost 73.2% of its value. An even worse pounding than the average technology fund suffered over that period.
阿尔凯文·兰迪斯在1999年11月5日美国东部标准时间上午11点的 CNN 财经新闻中的采访。如果兰迪斯自己的记录有任何指示，那么专注于你所知道的事情并不是你真正需要做的成功挑选股票的全部。从1999年底到2002年底，兰迪斯的基金充满了他声称从他在硅谷的基地第一手了解的科技公司失去了 73.2% 的价值，这比同期平均科技基金遭受的打击还要糟糕。
3 Sarah Lichtenstein and Baruch Fishoff. Do those who know more also know more about how much they know? Organizational Behavior and Human Performance, Volume 20, Number 2, December, 1977, pages 159 to 183.
三莎拉·利希滕斯坦和巴鲁赫·菲希霍夫知道的越多，也知道自己知道的越多吗？组织行为和人类表现，第20卷，第2号，1977年12月，第159-183页。
For Seeger Huberman, Familiarity Breeds Investment, Joshua D. Kovaal and Tobias J. Moskowitz, The Geography of Investment, and Ger Huberman and Paul Muller, Company Stock and 401k Plans. All available at http://papers.ssrn.com.
4参见古尔·胡伯曼的《熟悉产生投资》，约书亚·蒂科瓦尔 和托比亚斯 ·J. 莫斯科维茨的《投资的地理》，以及古尔、胡伯曼和保罗·森格穆勒的 401K 计划中的公司股票，所有这些都可以在 http://papers.accessorian.com 上找到。
5. According to finance professor Charles Jones of Columbia Business School, the cost of a small, one-way trade, either a buy or a sell, in a New York stock exchange. Listed stock dropped from about 1.25% in Graham's day to about 0.25% in 2000. For institutions like mutual funds, those costs are actually higher. See Charles M. Jones, A Century of Stock Market Liquidity and Trading Costs, at http://papers.ssrn.com。
根据哥伦比亚商学院的金融学教授查尔斯·琼斯的说法，在格雷厄姆的时代，纽约证券交易所上市股票的小额单项交易买入或卖出的成本从约 1.25% 下降到2000年的约 0.25%。对于像共同基金这样的机构来说，这些成本实际上更高。参见查尔斯 ·M. 琼斯《股市流动性和交易成本的一个世纪》，在 http://papers.accessorian.com。
6. To help determine whether the stocks you own are sufficiently diversified across different industrial sectors, you can use the free Instant X-ray function at www.morningstar.com or consult the Sector Information Global Industry Classification Standard at www.standardandpoors.com。
6. 为了帮助确定你所持有的股票是否在不同的行业部门中得到了足够的分散，你可以使用 3w.morningstar.com 上的免费即时 X 射线功能，或者咨询 3w.standardandpoors.com 上的行业信息全球行业分类标准。
7. For more on the rationale for keeping a portion of your portfolio in foreign stocks, see pages 186 to 187.
其关于保持投资组合中一部分为外国股票的理由，详见第186-187页。
8. Source: Spreadsheet data provided courtesy of Ibbotson Associates. Although it was not possible for retail investors to buy the entire S&P 500 index until 1976, the example nevertheless proves the power of buying more when stock prices go down.
8. 数据来源 Ibbotson Associates 提供的电子表格数据。尽管零售投资者在1976年之前无法购买整个标准普尔500指数，但这个例子仍然证明了股票价格下跌时增加购买的力量。
Here Graham has made a slip of the tongue. After insisting in Chapter 1 that the definition of an enterprising investor depends not on the amount of risk you seek, but the amount of work you are willing to put in, Graham falls back on the conventional notion that enterprising investors are more aggressive. The rest of the chapter, however, makes clear that Graham stands by his original definition. The great British economist John Maynard Keynes appears to have been the first to use the term enterprise as a synonym for analytical investment.
星号在这里，格雷厄姆有些口误。在第1章中间称进取型投资者的定义并非取决于你寻求的风险程度，而是你愿意投入的工作量之后，格雷厄姆又回到了传统的观念，即进取型投资者更激进。然而，本章的其余部分明确表明，格雷厄姆坚持他的原始定义。伟大的英国经济学家约翰·梅纳德·凯恩斯似乎是首次将企业一词用作分析投资的同义词。
High coupon issues are corporate bonds paying above average interest rates, in today's markets, at least 8%, or preferred stocks paying large dividend yields, 10% or more. If a company must pay high rates of interest in order to borrow money, that is a fundamental signal that it is risky. For more on high yield or junk bonds, see pages 145 to 147.
星号高息券是指支付高于平均利率的公司债券，在今天的市场中至少为 8%， 或支付大额股息的优先股 10% 或更多。如果一家公司必须支付高利率才能借款，那么这是一个基本的风险信号。关于高收益或垃圾债券的更多信息，详见第145-147页。
As of early 2003, the equivalent yields are roughly 5.1% on high-grade corporate bonds and 4.7% on 20-year tax-free municipal bonds. To update these yields, see www.bondsonline.com. bloomberg.com/asp/news/composites/html or www.bloomberg.com/markets/rates.html and www.bloomberg.com/marketsimuni.html。
截至2003年初，高级公司债券的等效收益率大约为5.1%，20年期免税市政债券的等效收益率为4.7%。要更新这些收益率，请查看3w.bondsonline.com/asp/news/composites/html 或3w.bloomberg.com/markets/rates.html 和3w.bloomberg.com/markets/simuni.html。
For a recent example that painfully reinforces Graham's point, see page 146 below.
星号对于一个痛苦地强化了格雷厄姆观点的最近例子，详见下面的第146页。
Bond prices are quoted in percentages of par value, or 100. A bond priced at 85 is selling at 85% of its principal value. A bond originally offered for $10,000, but now selling at 85, will cost $8,500. When bonds sell below 100, they are called discount bonds. Above 100, they become premium bonds.
星号债券价格以面值的百分比来报价，或者说100。一个以85报价的债券是以其本金值的85%出售，一个原本以$10,000发行，但现在以85出售的债券将花费$8,500。当债券的售价低于100时，它们被称为折扣债券；高于100时，它们称为溢价债券。
New issues of common stock, initial public offerings or IPOs, normally are sold with an underwriting discount, a built-in commission, of 7%. By contrast, the buyer's commission on older shares of common stock typically ranges below 4%. Whenever Wall Street makes roughly twice as much for selling something new as it does for selling something old, the new will get the harder sell.
星号新发行的普通股首次公开发行或 IPO 通常会有一个承销折扣，内置佣金为7%。相比之下，购买旧的普通股的佣金通常低于4%。每当华尔街通过销售新的东西赚取的钱大约是销售旧的东西的2倍时，新的东西就会得到更硬的推销。
Recently, finance professors Owen Lamont of the University of Chicago and Paul Schultz of the University of Notre Dame have shown that corporations choose to offer new shares to the public when the stock market is near a peak. For technical discussion of these issues, see Lamont's Evaluating Value Weighting, Corporate Events and Market Timing, and Schultz's Pseudo-Market Timing and the Long-Run Performance of IPOs. At http://papers.ssrn.com.
最近，芝加哥大学的财务教授欧文·拉蒙特和圣母大学的保罗·舒尔茨已经证明，公司选择在股市接近顶峰时向公众发行新股。关于这些问题的技术性讨论，参见拉蒙特的评估价值权重、公司事件和市场时机和舒尔茨的伪市场时机和 IPO 的长期表现在 http://papers.ssrn.com.
In the 2 years from June 1960 through May 1962, more than 850 companies sold their stock to the public for the first time, an average of more than one per day. In late 1967, the IPO market heated up again. In 1969, an astonishing 781 new stocks were born. That oversupply helped create the bear markets of 1969 and 1973 to 1974. In 1974, the IPO market was so dead that only 9 new stocks were created all year. 1975 saw only 14 stocks born. That undersupply, in turn, helped feed the bull market of the 1980s, when roughly 4,000 new stocks flooded the market, helping to trigger the overenthusiasm that led to the 1987 crash. Then the cycle swung the other way again as IPOs dried up in 1988 to 1990. That shortage contributed to the bull market of the 1990s, and, right on cue, Wall Street got back into the business of creating new stocks, cranking out nearly 5,000 IPOs. Then, after the bubble burst in 2000, only 88 IPOs were issued in 2001, the lowest annual total since 1979. In every case, the public has gotten burned on IPOs, has stayed away for at least 2 years, but has always returned for another scalding. For as long as stock markets have existed, investors have gone through this manic depressive cycle. In America's first great IPO boom, Back in 1825, a man was said to have been squeezed to death in the stampede of speculators trying to buy shares in the new Bank of Southwark. The wealthiest buyers hired thugs to punch their way to the front of the line. Sure enough, by 1829, stocks had lost roughly 25% of their value.
星号从1960年6月到1962年5月的2年间，超过850家公司首次向公众出售股票，平均每天超过1家。到1967年底 ，IPO 市场再次升温。1969年，惊人的781只新股诞生。这种供应过剩帮助创造了1969年和1973至1974年的熊市。1974年 ，IPO 市场几乎停滞不前，全年只有9只新股诞生；1975年只有14只新股诞生。反过来，这种供应不足有助于推动1980年代的牛市，当时大约有4000只新股涌入市场，这有助于引发导致1987年崩盘的过度热情。然后，周期又向另一个方向摆动，1988至1990年 IPO 枯竭。这种短缺有助于推动1990年代的牛市，而且恰好在这个时候，华尔街又开始创造新股，几乎发行了5000只 IPO。然后，在2000年泡沫破裂后，2001年只发行了88只 IPO， 这是自1979年以来的最低年度总数。在每一种情况下，公众都在 IPO 上受到了伤害，至少2年都没有参与，但总是会回来再次受到烫伤。只要股票市场存在，投资者就会经历这种躁郁症周期。在美国第一次大规模的 IPO 热潮中，1825年，据说有一个人在试图购买新南华克银行股票的投机者的踩踏中被挤死，最富有的买家雇佣暴徒打开通往排队前方的路。果然，到1829年，股票已经大约损失了25%的价值。
Asterisk here Graham is describing rights offerings, in which investors who already own a stock are asked to pony up even more money to maintain the same proportional interest in the company. This form of financing, still widespread in Europe, has become rare in the United States, except among closed-end funds.
星号这里，格雷厄姆在描述权益发行，即已经拥有股票的投资者被要求投入更多的钱，以保持在公司中相同的比例利益。这种融资形式在欧洲仍然广泛存在，但在美国已经变得罕见，除了在封闭式基金中。
Asterisk in Graham's day, the most prestigious investment banks generally steered clear of the IPO business, which was regarded as an undignified exploitation of naive investors. By the peak of the IPO boom in late 1999 and early 2000, however, Wall Street's biggest investment banks had jumped in with both feet. Venerable firms cast off their traditional prudence and behaved like drunken mud wrestlers, scrambling to foist ludicrously overvalued stocks on a desperately eager public. Graham's description of how the IPO process works is a classic that should be required reading in investment banking ethics classes, if there are any.
星号在格雷厄姆的时代，最有声望的投资银行通常避开 IPO 业务，因为它被视为对天真投资者的不体面的剥削。然而，在1999年底和2000年初 IPO 热潮的高峰期，华尔街最大的投资银行已经全力投入。古老的公司抛弃了他们传统的谨慎，表现得像醉酒的泥浆摔跤手，争先恐后地将荒谬的高估的股票强加给疯狂渴望的公众。格雷厄姆对 IPO 过程如何运作的描述是一部经典，应该成为投资银行道德课程的必读内容，如果有的话。
1C www.calpers.ca.gov/whatsapp/hot topic/worldcom_FAQs.htm and www.calpers.ca.gov/what's-new/press/2002/0716.htm. Retirement Systems of Alabama Quarterly Investment Report for May 31, 2001. At www.rsa.state.al. /investments/quarterly_report.htm, and John Bender, Strong Corporate Bond Fund Co-Manager. Quoted in www.businessweek.com/magazine/content/01_22B3734118.htm.
请参见3w.calpers.ca.gov/whatsapp/hot topic/worldcom FAQs.htm 和3w. Calpers CAGR What's No Press 20020716.htm 阿拉巴马州退休系统2001年5月31日的季度投资报告，网址为 3w.rc.state.al Us Investments Quarterly Report.htm 以及约翰·本德强大的公司债券基金联合经理在 3w.businessweek.com/magazine/content-01-B3734118.htm 中的引述。
Two, these numbers are all drawn from WorldCom's prospectus or sales document for the bond offering, filed May 11, 2001. It can be viewed at www.sec.gov/edgar/searchedgar/companysearch.html in company name, window, enter, WorldCom. Even without today's 2020 hindsight knowledge that WorldCom's earnings were fraudulently overstated, WorldCom's bond offering would have appalled Graham.
二，这些数字都来自 WorldCom 的债券发行说明书或销售文件。该文件于2001年5月11日提交，可以在 3w.sec.gov/edgar/searchedgar/companysearch.html 查看。在公司名称窗口中输入 WorldCom。即使没有今天的20%后见之明知道 WorldCom 的收益被欺诈性的夸大， WorldCom 的债券发行也会让格雷厄姆感到震惊。
3. For documentation on the collapse of WorldCom, see www.worldcom.com infodesk.
3. 关于 WorldCom 崩溃的文件，请参见 3w.worldcom.com/infodesk。
1. In the early 1970s, when Graham wrote, there were fewer than a dozen junk bond funds, nearly all of which charged sales commissions of up to 8.5%. Some even made investors pay a fee for the privilege of reinvesting their monthly dividends back into the fund.
一在格雷厄姆写作的1970年代初，只有不到10个垃圾债券基金，几乎所有的基金都收取高达 8.5% 的销售佣金，有些甚至让投资者为将他们的月度股息重新投资回基金的特权付费。
2. Edward I, Altman and Gorovbana, Defaults and Returns on High-Yield Bonds, Research Paper, Stern School of Business, New York University, 2002.
2. Edward I Altman 和 Gorovbana高收益债券的违约和回报研究论文，纽约大学斯特恩商学院，2002年。
3. Graham did not criticize foreign bonds lightly, since he spent several years early in his career acting as a New York-based bond agent for borrowers in Japan.
3. 格雷厄姆并不轻易批评外国债券，因为他在职业生涯的早期曾在日本的债券借款人中担任纽约的债券代理。
For 2 low-cost, well-run emerging markets bond funds are Fidelity New Markets Income Fund and T. Rowe Price Emerging Markets Bond Fund. For more information, see www.fidelity.com, www.troprice.com, and www.morningstar.com. Do not buy any emerging markets bond fund with annual operating expenses higher than 1.25%. And be forewarned that some of these funds charge short-term redemption fees to discourage investors from holding them for less than 3 months.
4. 2个低成本、运营良好的新兴市场债券基金是富达新市场收入基金合体。Rowe Price 新兴市场债券基金，更多信息请参见 3w.fidelity.com、3w.troprice.com 和 3w.morningstar.com。不要购买年度运营费用超过 1.25% 的新兴市场债券基金，并且要预先警告这些基金中的一些收取短期赎回费用，以阻止投资者持有时间少于3个月。
5. The definitive source on brokerage costs is the Plexus Group of Santa Monica, California, and its website, www.plexusgroup.com. Plexus argues persuasively that, just as most of the mass of an iceberg lies below the ocean surface, the bulk of brokerage costs are invisible, misleading investors into believing that their trading costs are insignificant if commission costs are low. The costs of trading NASDAQ stocks are considerably higher for individuals than the costs of trading NYSE-listed stocks. See page 128, footnote 5.
5. 关于经济费用的权威来源是位于加利福尼亚州圣塔莫尼卡的 Plexus 集团及其网站 3w.plexusgroup.com。Plexus 有力的论证，就像冰山的大部分质量位于海洋表面以下一样，经济费用的大部分是看不见的，误导投资者相信，如果佣金费用低，他们的交易成本就微不足道。交易纳斯达克股票的成本对个人来说， 远高于交易纽约证券交易所上市股票的成本。见第128页，角注5。
6 real-world conditions are still more harsh, since we are ignoring state income taxes in this example.
6现实世界的条件更为严酷，因为在这个例子中，我们忽略了州所得税。
7 Barber and Odine's findings are available at http://faculty.haas.berkeley.edu/odine/current%20research.htm and http://faculty.gsm.ucdavis.edu barber/research/default.html. Numerous studies, incidentally, have found virtually identical results among professional money managers, so this is not a problem limited to naive individuals.
7 Barber 和 Odine 的研究结果可以在 http://faculty.house.berkeley.edu/odine/current20research.htm 和 http://faculty.gsm.ucdavis.edu/barber-research-default.html 上找到。顺便说一句，许多研究发现，专业的资金管理人员中几乎有相同的结果，所以这不仅仅是天真的个人的问题。
8C www.microsoft.com/msft/stock.htm IPO investment results.
8请参见 3w.microsoft.com/msft/stock.htm IPO 投资结果。
9 JR, Ritter and Ivo Welch, a review of IPO activity, pricing, and allocations, Journal of Finance, August 2002, page 1797. Ritter's website at http://bear.cba.ufl.edu/Ritter and Welch's homepage at http://welch.som.yale.edu/ are goldmines of data for anyone interested in IPOs.
9 JR Ritter 和 Ivo Welch IPO 活动、定价和分配的回顾，金融杂志，2002年8月，第1797页。Ritter 的网站位于 http://bear.cba.ufl.edu/Ritter- 和 Welch 的主页位于 http://welch.som.yale.edu/。对于任何对 IPO 感兴趣的人来说，都是数据的金矿。
10 Message number 9, posted by Goldfinger69 on the VA Linux, LNUX, message board at messages.yahoo.com, dated December 16, 1999. Microsoft is the ticker symbol for Microsoft Corp.
10消息编号9，由 Goldfingers69 在 VA Linux, LNUX 的留言板上发布，位于 messages.yahoo.com， 日期为1999年12月16日。MSFT 是微软公司的股票代码。
Asterisk is already noted. See page 96, footnote. The new housing authority and new community bonds are no longer issued.
星号如前所述，见第96页，角注：新住房局和新社区债券已不再发行。
Today, these lower quality bonds in the special situation area are known as distressed or defaulted bonds. When a company is in approaching bankruptcy, its common stock becomes essentially worthless, since U.S. bankruptcy law entitles bondholders to a much stronger legal claim than shareholders. But if the company reorganizes successfully and comes out of bankruptcy, the bondholders often receive stock in the new firm, and the value of the bonds usually recovers once the company is able to pay interest again. Thus, the bonds of a troubled company can perform almost as well as the common stock of a healthy company. In these special situations, as Graham puts it, no true distinction exists between bonds and common stocks. Or,
今天，这些在特殊情况领域的低质量债券被称为困境或违约债券。当一家公司即将或正在破产时，其普通股基本上变得一文不值，因为美国破产法赋予债权人比股东更强大的法律权利。但是，如果公司成功重组并摆脱破产，债权人通常会收到新公司的股票，一旦公司能够再次支付利息，债券的价值通常会恢复。因此，一个有问题的公司的债券几乎可以像一个健康公司的普通股一样表现。在这些特殊情况下，正如格雷厄姆所说，债券和普通股之间不存在真正的区别。
asterisk note very carefully what Graham is saying here. Writing in 1972, he contends that the period since 1949, a stretch of more than 22 years, is too short a period from which to draw reliable conclusions. With his mastery of mathematics, Graham never forgets that objective conclusions require very long samples of large amounts of data. The charlatans who peddle time-tested, stock-picking gimmicks almost always base their findings on smaller samples than Graham would ever accept. Graham often used 50-year periods to analyze past data.
星号请仔细注意格雷厄姆在这里说的话。他在1972年写道，自1949年以来的时期，超过22年的时间，是一个过于短暂的时期，无法从中得出可靠的结论。凭借他的数学造诣，格雷厄姆从不忘记，客观的结论需要非常长的样本和大量的数据。那些都受经过时间考验的股票挑选噱头的骗子，他们的发现几乎总是基于比格雷厄姆所接受的样本更小的样本。格雷厄姆经常使用50年的时间段来分析过去的数据。
Today, the enterprising investor can assemble such a list over the internet by visiting such websites as www.morningstar.com. Try the Stock Quick Rank tool. www.quicken.com/investments/stocks/search/full and http://yahoo marketguide.com.
今天有进取心的投资者可以通过访问诸如 3w.morningstar.com 尝试使用 Stock Quick Rank 工具， 3w.quicken.com/investments/stocks/search/full 和 http://yahoo.marketguide.com 等网站，在互联网上整理出这样的列表。
Over the 10 years ending December 31st, 2002, funds investing in large growth companies, today's equivalent of what Graham calls growth funds, earned an annual average of 5.6%, underperforming the overall stock market by an average of 3.7 percentage points per year. However, large value funds investing in more reasonably priced big companies also underperformed the market over the same period by a full percentage point per year. Is the problem merely that growth funds cannot reliably select stocks that will outperform the market in the future? Or is it that the high costs of running the average fund, whether it buys growth or value companies, exceed any extra return the managers can earn with their stock picks? To update fund performance by type, see www.morningstar.com, category returns. For an enlightening reminder of how perishable the performance of different investment styles can be, see www.callan.com/resource/periodic_table/portable.pdf.
星号在截止2002年12月31日的10年间，投资于大型成长公司的基金，即格雷厄姆所说的成长基金的现代对应物，年均收益为 5.6%， 低于整体股市平均水平 3.7 个百分点。然而，投资于价格更为合理的大型公司的大型价值基金，在同一时期也低于市场平均水平，每年低1个百分点。问题仅仅在于，成长基金无法可靠的选择将来会超越市场的股票吗？还是说，运营平均基金的高昂成本，无论他购买的是成长型还是价值型公司，超过了经理们通过他们的股票选择所能赚取的额外回报？要更新基金类型的表现，请参见 3w.morningstar.com 类别回报。要了解不同投资风格的表现如何一变，请参见 3w.callan.com/resource/periodic-table-portable.pdf。
Graham makes this point to remind you that an enterprising investor is not one who takes more risk than average or who buys aggressive growth stocks. An enterprising investor is simply one who is willing to put in extra time and effort in researching his or her portfolio.
星号格雷厄姆强调这一点，提醒你，进取型投资者并不是那些比平均水平承担更多风险或购买激进增长股票的人。进取型投资者只是那些愿意在研究他或他的投资组合上投入额外时间和精力的人。
Notice that Graham insists on calculating the price/earnings ratio based on a multi-year average of past earnings. That way, you lower the odds that you will overestimate a company's value based on a temporarily high burst of profitability. Imagine that a company earned $3 per share over the past 12 months, but an average of only 50 cents per share over the previous 6 years. Which number, the sudden $3 or the steady 50 cents, is more likely to represent a sustainable trend? At 25 times the $3 it earned in the most recent year, the stock would be priced at $75. But at 25 times the average earnings of the past 7 years, $6 in total earnings, divided by 7, equals 85.7 cents per share in average annual earnings. The stock would be priced at only $21.43. Which number you pick makes a big difference. Finally, it's worth noting that the prevailing method on Wall Street today, basing price/earnings ratios primarily on next year's earnings, would be anathema to Graham. How can you value a company based on earnings it hasn't even generated yet? That's like setting house prices based on a rumor that Cinderella will be building her new castle right around the corner.
注意，格雷厄姆坚持要根据过去多年的平均收益来计算市盈率，这样你降低了基于暂时的高利润率过高估计公司价值的可能性。假设一家公司在过去12个月赚了每股3美元，但在前6年的平均收益只有每股50美分，哪个数字突然的3美元还是稳定的50美分，更有可能代表一个可持续的趋势。以最近1年赚的3美元的25倍，股票的价格将是75美元。但是以过去7年的平均收益的25倍，总收益6美元除以7，等于每股平均年收益 85.7 美分，股票的价格只有 21.43 美元。你选择的数字会产生很大的差异。最后，值得注意的是，今天华尔街的主流方法主要根据明年的收益来计算市盈率，对格雷厄姆来说是可憎的。你怎么能根据公司还没有产生的收益来评估它的价值呢？这就像根据灰姑娘将在拐角处建新城堡的谣言来设定房价。
Recent examples hammer Graham's point home. On September 21, 2000, Intel Corporation, the maker of computer chips, announced that it expected its revenues to grow by up to 5% in the next quarter. At first blush, that sounds great. Most big companies would be delighted to increase their sales by 5% in just 3 months. But in response, Intel's stock dropped 22%, a one-day loss of nearly $91 billion in total value. Why? Wall Street's analysts had expected Intel's revenue to rise by up to 10%. Similarly, on February 21, 2001, EMC Corporation, a data storage firm, announced that it expected its revenues to grow by at least 25% in 2001, but that a new caution among customers may lead to longer selling cycles. On that whiff of hesitation, EMC's shares lost 12.8% of their value in a single day.
星号最近的例子进一步证实了格雷厄姆的观点。2000年9月21日，计算机芯片制造商英特尔公司宣布，预计下一季度的收入将增长 5%。乍一看，这听起来很棒，大多数大公司都会很高兴在短短3个月内将销售额提高 5%。但是，英特尔的股票应声下跌 22%， 一天之内总价值损失近910亿美元。为什么呢？因为华尔街的分析师预计英特尔的收入将增长 10%。同样，2001年2月21日，数据存储公司 EMC 公司宣布，预计2001年的收入将至少增长 25%， 但是新的谨慎态度可能会导致销售周期延长。在这种犹豫不决的气息下， EMC 的股票在一天之内损失了 12.8% 的价值。
Today's equivalent of investors who have a close relationship with the particular company are so-called control persons, senior managers, or directors who help run the company and own huge blocks of stock. Executives like Bill Gates of Microsoft or Warren Buffett of Berkshire Hathaway have direct control over a company's destiny, and outside investors want to see these chief executives maintain their large shareholdings as a vote of confidence. But less senior managers and rank-and-file workers cannot influence the company's share price with their individual decisions, thus they should not put more than a small percentage of their assets in their own employer's stock. As for outside investors, no matter how well they think they know the company, the same objection applies.
星号今天的投资者与特定公司有密切关系的投资者的现代对应物是所谓的控制人，帮助运营公司并拥有大量股票的高级管理人员或董事。像微软的比尔、盖茨或伯克希尔、哈撒韦的沃伦、巴菲特这样的高管对公司的命运有直接的控制权。外部投资者希望看到这些首席执行官保持他们的大量股权，作为对公司的信心投票。但是，较低级别的管理人员和一线员工不能通过他们的个人决策影响公司的股价，因此，他们不应该在自己的雇主的股票中投入超过一小部分的资产。至于外部投资者，无论他们认为自己对公司了解的有多深，同样的反对意见也适用。
Drexel Firestone, a Philadelphia investment bank, merged in 1973 with Burnham and Company and later became Drexel Burnham Lambert, famous for its junk bond financing of the 1980s takeover boom.
星号费城投资银行 Drexel Firestone 在1973年与 Burnham 与 Co 合并，后来成为 Drexel Burnham Lambert， 以其在1980年代收购热潮中的垃圾债券融资而闻名。
This strategy of buying the cheapest stocks in the Dow Jones Industrial Average is now nicknamed the Dogs of the Dow approach. Information on the Dow 10 is available at www.djindexes.com/JSP/Dow510FAQ.JSP。
这种购买道琼斯工业平均指数中最便宜股票的策略，现在被昵称为道琼斯的狗方法。关于道琼斯时的信息，请访问 3w.djindexes.com/JSP/Dow510FAQ.JSP。
Among the steepest of the mountains recently made out of molehills. In May 1998, Pfizer Incorporated and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration announced that 6 men taking Pfizer's anti-impotence drug Viagra had died of heart attacks while having sex. Pfizer's stock immediately went flaccid, losing 3.4% in a single day on heavy trading. But Pfizer's shares surged ahead when research later showed that there was no cause for alarm. The stock gained roughly a third over the next 2 years. In late 1997, shares of Warner Lambert Company fell by 19% in a day when sales of its new diabetes drug were temporarily halted in England. Within 6 months, the stock had nearly doubled. In late 2002, Carnival Corporation, which operates cruise ships, lost roughly 10% of its value after tourists came down with severe diarrhea and vomiting on ships run by other companies.
星号最近的一些例子中，小题大做的情况最为严重。1998年5月，辉瑞公司和美国食品药品监督管理局宣布，有6名服用辉瑞的抗阳痿药物伟哥的男性在性交过程中死于心脏病发。辉瑞的股票立即疲软，1天之内在大量交易中损失了 3.4%。但是，当后来的研究显示没有警报的原因时，辉瑞的股票涨势强劲，在接下来的2年中，股票大约增长了1/3。1997年底，华纳兰伯特公司的新糖尿病药物在英国的销售暂时停止，股票在1天之内下跌了 19%， 但在6个月内，股票几乎翻了一番。2002年底，邮轮运营商嘉年华公司在其他公司的邮轮上的游客出现严重腹泻和呕吐症状后，其价值大约损失了 10%。
By net working capital, Graham means a company's current assets, such as cash, marketable securities, and inventories, minus its total liabilities, including preferred stock and long-term debt.
星号格雷厄姆所说的净营运资本是指公司的流动资产，如现金、可销售证券和库存，减去其总负债，包括优先股和长期债务。
From 1975 through 1983, small, secondary stocks outperformed large stocks by an amazing average of 17.6 percentage points per year. The investing public eagerly embraced small stocks, mutual fund companies rolled out hundreds of new funds specializing in them, and small stocks obliged by underperforming large stocks by 5 percentage points per year over the next decade. The cycle recurred in 1999, when small stocks beat big stocks by nearly 9 percentage points, inspiring investment bankers to sell hundreds of hot little high-tech stocks to the public for the first time. Instead of electronics, computers, or franchise in their names, the new buzzwords were .com, optical, wireless, and even prefixes like E- and I-. Investing buzzwords always turn into buzzsaws, tearing apart anyone who believes in them.
星号从1975年到1983年，小型、次级股票的表现比大型股票平均高出了惊人的 17.6个百分点。投资公众热衷于小型股票，共同基金公司推出了数百只专门投资于他们的新基金，而小型股票在接下来的10年里又低于大型股票5个百分点。这个周期在1999年再次出现，当时小型股票比大型股票高出了近9个百分点，激发了投资银行家们首次向公众出售数百只热门的小型高科技股票，而不是在他们的名字中使用电子、计算机或特许权。新的热词是.com、光学、无线，甚至还有像 E 和这样的前缀。投资热词总是变成热句，撕裂任何相信他们的人。
Asterisk defaulted railroad bonds do not offer significant opportunities today. However, as already noted, distressed and defaulted junk bonds, as well as convertible bonds issued by high-tech companies, may offer real value in the wake of the 2000 to 2002 market crash. But diversification in this area is essential and impractical without at least $100,000 to dedicate to distressed securities alone. Unless you are a millionaire several times over, this kind of diversification is not an option.
星号默认的铁路债券如今并未提供重大的机会。然而，正如已经提到的，2000至2002年市场崩溃后，高科技公司发行的困境和违约的垃圾债券以及可转换债券可能会提供真正的价值。但在这个领域中，多元化是必要的。而如果没有至少10万美元专门用于投资困境证券，这将是不切实际的。除非你是一个拥有数百万资产的人，否则这种多元化并不是一个选项。
Asterisk a classic recent example is Philip Morris, whose stock lost 23% in 2 days after a Florida court authorized jurors to consider punitive damages of up to $200 billion against the company, which had finally admitted that cigarettes may cause cancer. Within a year, Philip Morris's stock had doubled, only to fall back after a later multi-billion-dollar judgment in Illinois. Several other stocks have been virtually destroyed by liability lawsuits, including Johns Manville, W.R. Grace, and USG Corporation. Thus, never buy into a lawsuit remains a valid rule for all but the most intrepid investors to live by.
星号最近的一个经典例子是飞利浦莫里斯公司，该公司的股票在佛罗里达州法院授权陪审团考虑对该公司最高2000亿美元的惩罚性赔偿后的2天内下跌了2300分号，该公司最终承认香烟可能会导致癌症。1年之内，飞利浦莫里斯的股票翻了一番，只是在伊利诺伊州后来的数十亿美元判决后又回落了。包括 Johns Manville、W.R. Grace 和 USG Corp 在内的几家其他公司的股票几乎被责任诉讼摧毁。因此，永远不要买入诉讼中的股票，仍然是除了最勇敢的投资者之外的所有人都应该遵守的有效规则。
1 Lisa Gibbs, Optic Uptick, Money, April, 2000, pages 54 to 55.
Lisa Gibbs, 光学上升，金钱，2000年4月，第54-55页。
2 Brooks Southall, Cisco's In-Game Strategy, Investment News, November 30, 2000, pages 1, 23.
2 Brooks Southall, 思科的终局策略，投资新闻，2000年11月30日，第23页。
1 The Truth About Timing, Barron's, November 5, 2001, page 20. The headline of this article is a useful reminder of an enduring principle for the intelligent investor. Whenever you see the word truth in an article about investing, brace yourself. Many of the quotes that follow are likely to be lies. For one thing, an investor who bought stocks in 1966 and held them through late 2001 would have ended up with at least $40, not $11.71. The study cited in Barron's appears to have ignored the reinvestment of dividends.
1. 关于定时的真相，巴伦，2001年11月5日，第20页。这篇文章的标题是对聪明投资者一个持久原则的有用提醒。每当你在关于投资的文章中看到真相这个词时，做好准备，接下来的许多引述可能都是谎言。例如，一个在1966年买入股票并持有至2001年底的投资者至少会有40美元，而不是11.7亿美元。巴伦引用的研究似乎忽略了股息的再投资。
To the New York Times, January 7, 1973, Special Economic Survey Section, pages 2, 19, 44.
2纽约时报1973年1月7日特别的经济调查板块第2 19 44页。
3 Press Release, It's a good time to be in the market, says R. M. Leary and Company, December 3, 2001.
3新闻发布，现在是进入市场的好时机。R.M. Leary 与 Company 说，2001年12月3日。
For you would also have saved thousands of dollars in annual subscription fees, which have not been deducted from the calculations of these newsletters' returns. And brokerage costs and short-term capital gains taxes are usually much higher for market timers than for buy-and-hold investors. For the Duke study, see John R. Graham and Campbell R. Harvey, Grading the Performance of Market Timing Newsletters, Financial Analyst Journal, November/December, 1997, pages 54 to 66. Also available at www.duke.edu/research.htm.
四，你也会节省数千美元的年度订阅费用，这些费用并未从这些通讯的回报计算中扣除。而且，对于市场定时者来说，经济费用和短期资本利得税通常比持有并持有的投资者要高。关于杜克大学的研究，参见 John R. Graham 和 Campbell R. Harvey 评估市场定时通讯的表现，金融分析师杂志1997年12/11月第54-66页，也可在 3w.edu/charvey-research.htm 查看。
5. For more on sensible alternatives to market timing, rebalancing, and dollar cost averaging, see chapters 5 and 8.
5. 关于市场定时的明智替代方案，在平衡和定额投资，请参阅第5章和第8章。
6. Carol J. Loomis, The 15% Delusion, Fortune, February 5, 2001, pages 102 to 108.
6. Carol J. Loomis, 15%的幻觉，财富，2001年2月5日，第102-108页。
7. C. Jason Zweig, A Matter of Expectations, Money, January, 2001, pages 49 to 50.
7. 参见 Jason Zweig, 期望的问题，金钱，2001年1月，第49-50页。
8. Lewis K. C. John, Jason Karseski, and Joseph Lakonishak, The Level and Persistence of Growth Rates, National Bureau of Economic Research, Working Paper Number 8282, May 2001. Available at www.nber.org/papers-w8282.
8. Lewis K. C. Chen, Jason Karseski 和 Joseph Lakonishak, 增长率的水平和持久性，国家经济研究局工作论文 No. 8282 2001年5月，可在 3w.northbystar.org/papers/w8282 查看。
9. Almost exactly 20 years earlier, in October 1982, Johnson & Johnson stock lost 17.5% of its value in a week when several people died after ingesting Tylenol that had been laced with cyanide by an unknown outsider. Johnson & Johnson responded by pioneering the use of tamper-proof packaging, and the stock went on to be one of the great investments of the 1980s.
9. 几乎在20年前的1982年10月，约翰逊和约翰逊的股票在一周内失去了 17.5% 的价值。当时有几个人在服用被未知人士用氰化物掺假的泰诺后死亡。约翰逊和约翰逊通过开创性的使用防篡改包装来应对，该股票在1980年代成为了伟大的投资之一。
10. For the observation that it is amazingly difficult to remain on the Forbes 400, I am indebted to investment manager Kenneth Fisher, himself a Forbes columnist.
10. 对于在福布斯400强中保持位置极其困难的观察，我要感谢投资经理 Kenneth Fisher， 他本人也是福布斯的专栏作家。
11. In the late 1990s, the forecasts of market strategists became more influential than ever before. They did not, unfortunately, become more accurate. On March 10, 2000, the very day that the Nasdaq Composite Index hit its all-time high of 5,048.62, Prudential Securities' chief technical analyst Ralph Acampora said in USA Today that he expected Nasdaq to hit 6,000 within 12 to 18 months. 5 weeks later, Nasdaq had already shriveled to 3,321.29, but Thomas Galvin, a market strategist at Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette, declared that there's only 200 or 300 points of downside for the Nasdaq and 2,000 on the upside. It turned out that there were no points on the upside and more than 2,000 on the downside, as Nasdaq kept crashing until it finally scraped bottom on October 9, 2002, at 1,114.11. In March 2001, Abby Joseph Cohen, chief investment strategist at Goldman Sachs & Company, predicted that the Standard & Poor's 500 stock index would close the year at 1,650 and that the Dow Jones Industrial Average would finish 2001 at 13,000. We do not expect a recession, said Cohen, and believe that corporate profits are likely to grow at close to trend growth rates later this year. The U.S. economy was sinking into recession even as she spoke, and the S&P 500 ended 2001 at 1,148.08. While the Dow finished at 10,021.50 to 30% and 23% below her forecasts, respectively.
11在1990年代末，市场策略师的预测比以往任何时候都更具影响力。不幸的是，他们并没有变得更准确。2000年3月10日，就在纳斯达克综合指数达到其历史最高点5048.62的那一天，普正证券的首席技术分析师 Ralph Acampora 在《今日美国》中表示，他预计纳斯达克在12到18个月内将达到6000。5周后，纳斯达克已经缩水到3321.29，但是 Donaldson、Lufkin 与 Jan Red 的市场策略师 Thomas Galvin 宣称，纳斯达克的下行空间只有200或300点，上行空间有2000点。结果是，上行空间没有任何点数，下行空间超过2000点，因为纳斯达克一直在崩溃，直到2002年10月9日最终触底，达到1114.11。2001年3月，高盛的首席投资策略师 Abby Joseph Cohen 预测，标准普尔500指数将在年底收于1650点，道琼斯工业平均指数将在2001年底收于13000点。我们不预期会有衰退，Cohen 说，并且认为今年晚些时候公司利润可能会接近趋势增长率。然而，就在他发言的时候，美国经济正在陷入衰退，标准普尔500指数在2001年底收于1148.08，而道琼斯工业平均指数收于10021.50，分别低于他的预测30%和23%。
Asterisk see page 3.
星号键第3页。
Asterisk without bear markets to take stock prices back down. Anyone waiting to buy low will feel completely left behind, and, all too often, will end up abandoning any former caution and jumping in with both feet. That's why Graham's message about the importance of emotional discipline is so important. From October 1990 through January 2000, the Dow Jones Industrial Average marched relentlessly upward, never losing more than 20% and suffering a loss of 10% or more only 3 times. The total gain, not counting dividends, 395.7%. According to Crandall, Pierce and Company, this was the second longest uninterrupted bull market of the past century. Only the 1949 to 1961 boom lasted longer. The longer a bull market lasts, the more severely investors will be afflicted with amnesia. After 5 years or so, many people no longer believe that bear markets are even possible. All those who forget are doomed to be reminded, and, in the stock market, recovered memories are always unpleasant.
星号如果没有熊市来拉低股票价格，任何等待低买的人都会感到完全落后，而且往往会放弃之前的谨慎，两脚跳进市场。这就是为什么格雷厄姆关于情绪纪律重要性的信息如此重要。从1990年10月到2000年1月，道琼斯工业平均指数不断上升，从未下跌超过20%，只有3次下跌10%或更多。总收益不包括股息395.7%。根据克兰达尔·皮尔斯公司的数据，这是过去1个世纪中第2长的无间断牛市，只有1949至1961年的繁荣期持续时间更长。牛市持续的时间越长，投资者遭受失忆症的程度就越严重。大约5年后，许多人甚至不再相信熊市是可能的。所有忘记的人都注定要被提醒，在股市中恢复的记忆总是令人不悦。
Asterisk Graham discusses this recommended policy in Chapter 4, pages 89 to 91. This policy, now called tactical asset allocation, is widely followed by institutional investors like pension funds and university endowments.
星号格雷厄姆在第4章第89-91页中讨论了这个推荐政策。这个政策现在被称为战术资产配置，广泛的被像养老基金和大学捐赠基金这样的机构投资者遵循。
Asterisk many of these formula planners would have sold all their stocks at the end of 1954, after the U.S. stock market rose 52.6%, the second highest yearly return then on record. Over the next 5 years, these market timers would likely have stood on the sidelines as stocks doubled.
星号许多这些公式规划者可能在1954年底卖掉了他们所有的股票，当时美国股市上涨了 52.6%， 这是当时记录的第2高年度回报率。在接下来的5年里，这些市场定时者可能会站在一旁看着股票翻倍。
Easy ways to make money in the stock market fade for 2 reasons: the natural tendency of trends to reverse over time, or regress to the mean, and the rapid adoption of the stock-picking scheme by large numbers of people, who pile in and spoil all the fun of those who got there first. Note that, in referring to his discomforting experience, Graham is, as always, honest in admitting his own failures. See Jason Zweig, Murphy was an investor, Money, July 2002, pages 61 to 62, and Jason Zweig, New Year's Play, Money, December 2000, pages 89 to 90.
在股市中轻松赚钱的方法消失有2个原因，趋势随着时间的推移自然倾向于反转或者回归平均值，以及大量人迅速采用股票挑选方案，他们涌入并破坏了那些先到者的所有乐趣。注意，格雷厄姆在提到他的不安的经历时，如同他一直以来的做法，诚实地承认自己的失败。参见 Jason Zweig 投资者墨菲 Money 杂志2002年7月第61-62页，以及 Jason Zweig 新年的游戏 Money 杂志2000年12月第89-90页。
Today's equivalent of what Graham calls second-line companies would be any of the thousands of stocks not included in the Standard & Poor's 500 stock index. A regularly revised list of the 500 stocks in the S&P index is available at www.standardandpoors.com.
星号格雷厄姆所说的二线公司的今日对等物是标准普尔500指数中未包含的数千只股票。在 3w.standardandpoors.com 上可以找到定期修订的 S&P 500股票列表。
Note carefully what Graham is saying here. It is not just possible, but probable, that most of the stocks you own will gain at least 50% from their lowest price and lose at least 33% from their highest price, regardless of which stocks you own or whether the market as a whole goes up or down. If you can't live with that, or you think your portfolio is somehow magically exempt from it, then you are not yet entitled to call yourself an investor. Graham refers to a 33% decline as the equivalent one-third because a 50% gain takes a $10 stock to $15. From $15, a 33% loss or $5 drop takes it right back to $10, where it started.
仔细注意格雷厄姆在这里说的话，这不仅可能，而且很可能，你拥有的大部分股票会从最低价上涨至少 50%， 并从最高价下跌至少33%，无论你拥有哪些股票，或者市场整体是上涨还是下跌。如果你无法接受这一点，或者你认为你的投资组合在某种神奇的方式下免除了这一点，那么你还没有资格称自己为投资者。格雷厄姆将 33% 的下跌称为等价1/3，因为 50% 的涨幅会将$10的股票推高到$15。从$15开始 33% 的损失或$5的下跌会将其拉回到$10，也就是开始的地方。
For today's investor, the ideal strategy for pursuing this formula is rebalancing, which we discuss on pages 104 to 105.
星号对于今天的投资者追求这个公式的理想策略是在平衡，我们在第104-105页上进行了讨论。
Most companies today provide an engraved stock certificate only upon special request. Stocks exist, for the most part, in purely electronic form, much as your bank account contains computerized credits and debits, not actual currency, and thus have become even easier to trade than they were in Graham's day.
星号现在的大多数公司只有在特殊请求时才提供雕刻的股票证书。股票大部分以纯电子形式存在，就像你的银行账户包含电脑化的借贷，而不是实际的货币，因此比格雷厄姆时代的交易更容易。
Net asset value, book value, balance sheet value, and tangible asset value are all synonyms for net worth, or the total value of a company's physical and financial assets minus all its liabilities. It can be calculated using the balance sheets in a company's annual and quarterly reports. From total shareholders' equity, subtract all soft assets such as goodwill, trademarks, and other intangibles. Divide by the fully diluted number of shares outstanding to arrive at book value per share.
净资产价值、账面价值、资产负债表价值和有形资产价值都是净值的同义词，或者是公司的物理和金融资产总值减去所有负债的值。可以使用公司年度和季度报告中的资产负债表来计算，从股东总权益中减去所有软性资产，如商誉、商标和其他无形资产，除以全部摊薄的股份总数，得到每股账面价值。
Graham's use of the word paradox is probably an allusion to a classic article by David Durand, Growth Stocks and the Petersburg Paradox, The Journal of Finance, Volume 12, Number 3, September, 1957. Pages 348 to 363, which compares investing in high-priced growth stocks to betting on a series of coin flips in which the payoff escalates with each flip of the coin. Durand points out that if a growth stock could continue to grow at a high rate for an indefinite period of time, an investor should, in theory, be willing to pay an infinite price for its shares. Why then has no stock ever sold for a price of infinity dollars per share? Because the higher the assumed future growth rate, and the longer the time period over which it is expected, the wider the margin for error grows, and the higher the cost of even a tiny miscalculation becomes. Graham discusses this problem further in Appendix 4, page 570.
星号格雷厄姆使用悖论一词，可能是在暗指大卫·杜兰德的一篇经典文章《增长股与彼得堡悖论》金融学杂志第12卷第3期，1957年9月第348-363页。该文将投资高价增长股比作在一系列硬币翻转中下注，每次翻转的赔率都在增加。杜兰德指出，如果一只增长股能够无限期地以高速度增长，那么投资者应该理论上愿意为其股票支付无限的价格。那么，为什么没有股票曾经以每股无限美元的价格出售过呢？因为假设的未来增长率越高，预期的时间期限越长，误差的范围就越大，即使是微小的计算错误，其成本也会越来越高。格雷厄姆在附录4第570页中进一步讨论了这个问题。
The more recent history of A&P is no different. At year-end 1999, its share price was $27.875. At year-end 2000, $7. A year later, $23.78. At year-end 2002, $8.06. Although some accounting irregularities later came to light at A&P, it defies all logic to believe that the value of a relatively stable business like groceries could fall by 3/4 in 1 year, triple the next year, then drop by 2/3 the year after that.
星号 A&P 的近期历史也没有什么不同。1999年年底，其股价为27.875美元，2000年年底为7.00美元，1年后为23.78美元，2002年年底为8.06美元。尽管后来在 A&P 公司发现了一些会计不规则行为，但是相信像杂货这样相对稳定的业务的价值在1年内下跌3/4，第2年增长3倍，然后在第3年下跌2/3，这完全违反了所有的逻辑。
Only to the extent that it suits his book means only to the extent that the price is favorable enough to justify selling the stock. In traditional brokerage lingo, the book is an investor's ledger of holdings and trades.
星号只有在符合它的账本的程度上，意味着只有在价格足够优惠以证明出售股票的程度上。在传统的经济型化中，账本是投资者的持有和交易记录。
This may well be the single most important paragraph in Graham's entire book. In these 113 words, Graham sums up his lifetime of experience. You cannot read these words too often. They are like kryptonite for bear markets. If you keep them close at hand and let them guide you throughout your investing life, you will survive whatever the markets throw at you.
这可能是格雷厄姆整本书中最重要的一段话。在这113个词中，格雷厄姆总结了他一生的经验。你读这些话永远不会过多，它们就像是熊市的课时。如果你将它们牢记在心，并让它们在你的投资生涯中指引你，你将能够在市场的任何变动中生存下来。
Graham has much more to say on what is now known as corporate governance. See the commentary on Chapter 19.
星号格雷厄姆对现在被称为公司治理的问题有更多的看法，请参阅第19章的评论。
By what Graham called the rule of opposites, in 2002 the yields on long-term U.S. Treasury bonds hit their lowest levels since 1963. Since bond yields move inversely to prices, those low yields meant that prices had risen, making investors most eager to buy just as bonds were at their most expensive and as their future returns were almost guaranteed to be low. This provides another proof of Graham's lesson that the intelligent investor must refuse to make decisions based on market fluctuations.
星号根据格雷厄姆所说的反向规则，2002年 美国长期国债的收益率达到了自1963年以来的最低水平。由于债券收益率与价格呈反向移动，这些低收益率意味着价格已经上涨，使得投资者在债券价格最高、未来回报几乎肯定会低的时候最渴望购买。这再次证明了格雷厄姆的教训，即聪明的投资者必须拒绝根据市场波动做出决策。
Asterisk an updated analysis for today's readers, explaining recent yields and the wider variety of bonds and bond funds available today, can be found in the commentary on Chapter 4.
星号对于今天的读者，可以在第4章的评论中找到对最近的收益率和现金可用的更广泛的债券和债券基金的更新分析。
Asterisk is mentioned in the commentary on Chapters 2 and 4. Treasury inflation-protected securities, or TIPS, are a new and improved version of what Graham is suggesting here.
星号如第2章和第4章的评论中所提到的国库通胀保护证券或者 TIPS 是格雷厄姆在这里建议的新的改进版本。
1C Graham's text, pages 204 to 205.
一参见格雷厄姆的文本第204-205页。
2. As Graham noted in a classic series of articles in 1932, the Great Depression caused the shares of dozens of companies to drop below the value of their cash and other liquid assets, making them worth more dead than alive.
二正如格雷厄姆在1932年的一系列经典文章中所指出的，大萧条使得数十家公司的股票价格跌破了其现金和其他流动资产的价值，使得他们死了值钱，活着不值钱。
3. News release, the Spectrum Group, plan sponsors are losing the battle to prevent declining participation and deferrals into defined contribution plans. October 25, 2002.
三新闻发布 Spectrum 集团计划发起人正在失去阻止参与度和对明确定义的贡献计划的缴款下降的战斗。2002年10月25日。
For a few months later, on March 10, 2000, the very day that NASDAQ hit its all-time high, online trading pundit James J. Cramer wrote that he had repeatedly been tempted in recent days to sell Berkshire Hathaway short, a bit that Buffett's stock had farther to fall. With a vulgar thrust of his rhetorical pelvis, Cramer even declared that Berkshire's shares were ripe for the banging. That same day, market strategist Ralph Acampora of Prudential Securities asked, Norfolk Southern or Cisco Systems, where do you want to be in the future? Cisco, a key to tomorrow's internet superhighway, seemed to have it all over Norfolk Southern, part of yesterday's railroad system. Over the next year, Norfolk Southern gained 35%, while Cisco lost 70%.
4几个月后，2000年3月10日，就在纳斯达克达到历史最高点的那一天，在线交易专家詹姆斯 ·J. 克拉默写道：“他近日来反复受到诱惑，想做空伯克希尔·哈撒韦，这是赌巴菲特的股票还有进一步下跌的空间。”克拉默甚至粗俗地挥舞他的修辞骨盆，宣称伯克希尔的股票已经熟透，等待被击打。同一天，普正证券的市场策略师拉尔夫·阿坎波拉问道：“诺福克南方铁路公司或思科系统，你想在未来的哪个地方？”作为明日互联网超级公路的关键，思科似乎比诺福克南方铁路公司昨日的铁路系统更具优势。在接下来的1年里，诺福克南方铁路公司增长了 35%， 而思科则下跌了 70%。
5. When asked what keeps most individual investors from succeeding, Graham had a concise answer. The primary cause of failure is that they pay too much attention to what the stock market is doing currently. See Benjamin Graham, Thoughts on Security Analysis, transcript of lecture at Northeast Missouri State University Business School, March, 1972, Financial History Magazine, number 42, March, 1991, page 8.
5. 当被问及什么阻止了大多数个人投资者成功时，格雷厄姆给出了一个简洁的答案：失败的主要原因是他们过于关注股市当前的动态。参见本杰明·格雷厄姆对证券分析的思考，1972年3月在东北密苏里州立大学商学院的讲座记录，《金融历史》杂志，1991年3月第42期第8页。
6. Never mind what these terms mean, or are supposed to mean. While in public these classifications are treated with the utmost respect, in private most people in the investment business regard them with the contempt normally reserved for jokes that aren't funny.
6. 不用在意这些术语的含义，或者它们应该意味着什么。虽然在公开场合， 这些分类受到了极高的尊重，但在私下里，大多数投资业的人都用通常留给不好笑的笑话的蔑视来看待他们。
7. See the brilliant column by Walter Updegrave, Keep It Real, Money, February 2002, pages 53 to 56.
7参见沃尔特·厄普德格雷夫的精彩专栏《保持真实》，金钱杂志，2002年2月，第53-56页。
8. See Jason Zweig, Did You Beat the Market? Money, January 2000, pages 55 to 58.
8参见杰森·茨魏格，你击败了市场吗？金钱杂志，2000年1月，第55-58页。
9. The neuroscience of investing is explored in Jason Zweig, Are You Wired for Wealth? Money, October 2002, pages 74 to 83. Also available at http://money.cnn.com/2002/pf/investing/agenda_brain_short/index.htm. See also Jason Zweig, The Trouble with Humans, Money, November 2000, pages 67 to 70.
9投资的神经科学在杰森·茨魏格的《你是为财富而生吗》中得到了探索。金钱杂志，2002年10月，第74-83页，也可在 http://money.cnn.com/09/09-2002-0.agenda_brain_short_index.htm 查看。另请参见杰森·茨魏格《人类的问题》金钱杂志，2000年11月，第67-70页。
10. It's also worth asking whether you could enjoy living in your house if its market price was reported to the last penny every day in the newspapers and on TV.
是也值得问一下，如果你的房子的市场价格每天都在报纸和电视上精确到最后1分钱的报道，你是否还能享受住在你的房子里？
11. In a series of remarkable experiments in the late 1980s, a psychologist at Columbia and Harvard, Paul Anderson, showed that investors who received frequent news updates on their stocks earned half the returns of investors who got no news at all. See Jason Zweig, Here's How to Use the News and Tune Out the Noise. Money, July 1998, pages 63 to 64.
是以在20世纪80年代末的一系列引人注目的实验中，哥伦比亚和哈佛的心理学家保罗·安德烈亚森展示了那些经常接收到他们股票新闻更新的投资者，其回报率只有那些完全没有接收到新闻的投资者的一半。参见杰森·茨魏格如何利用新闻并屏蔽噪音，金钱杂志1998年7月，第63-64页。
12. Federal tax law is subject to constant change. The example of Coca-Cola stock given here is valid under the provisions of the U.S. tax code as it stood in early 2003.
12联邦税法经常变动。这里给出的可口可乐股票的例子是根据2003年初美国税法规定的有效的。
13. This example assumes that the investor had no realized capital gains in 2002 and did not reinvest any Coke dividends. Tax swaps are not to be undertaken lightly, since they can be mishandled easily. Before doing a tax swap, read IRS publication 550 www.irs.gov/pub/irsbdf/p550.pdf. A good guide to managing your investment taxes is Robert N. Gordon with Jan M. Rosen, Wall Street Secrets for Tax-Efficient Investing, Bloomberg Press, Princeton, New Jersey, 2001. Finally, before you pull the trigger, consult a professional tax advisor.
13本例假设投资者在2002年没有实现的资本收益，也没有再投资任何可口可乐的股息。税收置换不应轻易进行，因为它们很容易被处理不当。在进行税收置换之前，请阅读 IRS 出版物550 3w.irs.gov/pub/irsbdf/p550.pdf。管理投资税收的好指南是 Robert N. Gordon 和 Jan M. Rosen 的《华尔街的税效投资秘诀》Bloomberg Press, Princeton, New Jersey, 2001。最后，在你采取行动之前，咨询一下专业的税务顾问。
Asterisk It is a violation of federal law for an open-end mutual fund, a closed-end fund, or an exchange-traded fund to sell shares to the public unless it has registered or made mandatory financial filings with the SEC.
星号开放式共同基金、封闭式基金或交易所交易基金向公众出售股份，除非他已经注册或向 SEC 进行了强制性的财务报告，否则将违反联邦法律。
The fund industry has gone from very large to immense. At year-end 2002, there were 8,279 mutual funds holding $6.56 trillion, 514 closed-end funds with $149.6 billion in assets, and 116 exchange-trade funds or ETFs with $109.7 billion. These figures exclude such fund-like investments as variable annuities and unit investment trusts.
基金行业已经从非常大发展到巨大。到2002年底，有8279个共同基金，持有6.56万亿美元；514个封闭式基金，资产为1496亿美元，以及116个交易所交易基金或 ETF， 资产为1097亿美元。这些数字不包括像可变年金和单位投资信托这样的基金类投资。
Asterisk lists of the major types of mutual funds can be found at www.ici.org PDF/G2understanding.pdf and http://news.morningstar.com/fundreturns. Category returns.html. Letter stock funds no longer exist. While hedge funds are generally banned by SEC rules from selling shares to any investor whose annual income is below $200,000 or whose net worth is below $1 million.
星号可以在www.ici.org/gr_understanding.pdf 和 http://news.morningstar.com/fundreturns/categoryreturns.html 找到主要类型的共同基金的列表。信托股基金已经不存在。而对于年收入低于20万美元或净资产低于100万美元的投资者 ，SEC 规定通常禁止对冲基金出售股份。
Today, the maximum sales load on a stock fund tends to be around 5.75%. If you invest $10,000 in a fund with a flat 5.75% sales load, $575 will go to the person and brokerage firm that sold it to you, leaving you with an initial net investment of $9,425. The $575 sales charge is actually 6.1% of that amount, which is why Graham calls the standard way of calculating the charge a sales gimmick. Since the 1980s, no-load funds have become popular, and they no longer tend to be smaller than load funds.
今天，股票基金的最高销售费用通常在 5.75% 左右。如果你在一个销售费用为 5.75% 的基金中投资1万美元，那么575美元将支付给销售给你的人和经纪公司，你的初始净投资为9425美元。575美元的销售费用实际上占该金额的 6.1%， 这就是为什么格雷厄姆称计算费用的标准方式为销售噱头。自1980年代以来，无负担基金已经变得流行。他们不再倾向于比负担基金小。
Nearly every mutual fund today is taxed as a regulated investment company, or RIC, which is exempt from corporate income tax so long as it pays out essentially all of its income to its shareholders. In the option that Graham omits to avoid clutter, a fund can ask the SEC for special permission to distribute one of its holdings directly to the fund's shareholders, as his Graham Newman Corporation did in 1948. Parceling out shares in Geico to Graham Newman's own investors. This sort of distribution is extraordinarily rare.
几乎每个共同基金今天都被税收为受监管的投资公司，或者说 REIT， 只要他将其所有的收入支付给其股东，就免于公司所得税。在格雷厄姆省略的选项之中，一个基金可以向 SEC 申请特别许可，直接将其持有的一种资产分配给基金的股东，就像他的格雷厄姆纽曼公司在1948年做的那样，将Geico的股份分配给格雷厄姆纽曼的投资者。这种分配非常罕见。
Asterisk dual-purpose funds, popular in the late 1980s, have essentially disappeared from the marketplace, a shame, since they offered investors a more flexible way to take advantage of the skills of great stock pickers like John Neff. Perhaps the recent bear market will lead to a renaissance of this attractive investment vehicle.
星号双重目标基金在1980年代末非常流行，但现在基本上已经从市场上消失，这是一种遗憾，因为他们为投资者提供了更灵活的方式，以利用像约翰·内夫这样的伟大股票挑选者的技巧。 也许最近的熊市将导致这种有吸引力的投资工具的复兴。
Performance funds were all the rage in the late 1960s. They were equivalent to the aggressive growth funds of the late 1990s and served their investors no better.
绩效基金在1960年代末非常流行，它们相当于1990年代末的激进增长基金，并且对其投资者的服务并无改善。
For periods as long as 10 years, the returns of the Dow and the S&P 500 can diverge by fairly wide margins. Over the course of the typical investing lifetime, however, say 25 to 50 years, their returns have tended to converge quite closely.
星号对于长达10年的期间，道琼斯和标普500的回报可以相差相当大的幅度。然而，在典型的投资生命周期中，比如说25到50年，他们的回报趋向于非常接近的汇合。
One of the doomed companies Graham refers to as National Student Marketing Corporation, a con game masquerading as a stock, whose saga was told brilliantly in Andrew Tobias's The Funny Money Game, Playboy Press, New York. 1971. Among the supposedly sophisticated investors who were snookered by NSM's charismatic founder, Court Randall, were the endowment funds of Cornell and Harvard and the trust departments at such prestigious banks as Morgan Guaranty and Bankers Trust.
星号格雷厄姆提到的注定失败的公司之一是 National Student Marketing Corp， 这是一个以股票为幌子的骗局，其故事在 Andrew Tobias 的 The Funny Money Game, Playboy Press, New York, 1971中被生动地讲述。被 NSM 的魅力四溢的创始人 Court Randall 欺骗的那些被认为是精明的投资者，包括康奈尔和哈佛的捐赠基金，以及摩根保证和银行家信托等知名银行的信托部门。
Is only the latest proof that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Consider that Ryan Jacob, a 29-year-old boy wonder, launched the Jacob Internet Fund at year-end 1999. After producing a 216% return at his previous .com fund, investors poured nearly $300 million into Jacob's fund in the first few weeks of 2000. It then proceeded to lose 79.1% in 2000, 56.4% in 2001, and 13% in 2002, a cumulative collapse of 92%. That loss may have made Mr. Jacob's investors even older and wiser than it made him.
星号作为事物越是变化，越是保持不变的最新证明。考虑一下 Ryan Jacob 这位29岁的神童，在1999年底创立了 Jacob 互联网基金。此前，他在他的上一个点对点基金中产生了216%的回报。投资者在2000年的前几周内向 Jacob 的基金投入了近3亿美元。然后，该基金在2000年下跌了79.1%， 2001年下跌了56.4%。2002年下跌了13%，累计下跌了92%。这种损失可能使 Jacob 的投资者比他自己更老、更聪明。
Intriguingly, the disastrous boom and bust of 1999 to 2002 also came roughly 35 years after the previous cycle of insanity. Perhaps it takes about 35 years for the investors who remember the last new economy craze to become less influential than those who do not. If this intuition is correct, the intelligent investor should be particularly vigilant around the year 2030.
有趣的是，1999至2002年的灾难性繁荣和衰退，也大约在上一个疯狂周期之后的35年出现。也许大约需要35年，记住上一次新经济狂潮的投资者变得不如那些不记得的人有影响力。如果这种直觉是正确的，那么聪明的投资者应该在2030年左右特别警惕。
Today's equivalent of Graham's scarce exceptions tend to be open-end funds that are closed to new investors, meaning that the managers have stopped taking in any more cash. While that reduces the management fees they can earn, it maximizes the returns their existing shareholders can earn. Because most fund managers would rather look out for number one than be number one, closing a fund to new investors is a rare and courageous step.
星号今天的 Graham 的稀有例外往往是对新投资者关闭的开放式基金，意味着管理者已经停止接受任何更多的现金。虽然这减少了他们可以赚取的管理费，但它最大化了他们现有股东可以赚取的回报。因为大多数基金经理宁愿照顾自己而不是成为第一，所以对新投资者关闭基金是一种罕见而勇敢的举动。
1C Jason's Zweig, Did You Beat the Market? Money, January 2000, pages 55 to 58, time/CNN poll number 15, October 25th to 26th, 2000, question 29.
一参见 Jason Swipe， 你击败了市场吗 ？Money， 2000年1月第55-58页 ，Time CNN poll 井号15， 2000年10月25至26日，问题29。
One sector funds specializing in almost every imaginable industry are available and date back to the 1920s. After nearly 80 years of history, the evidence is overwhelming. The most lucrative, and thus most popular, sector of any given year often turns out to be among the worst performers of the following year. Just as idle hands are the devil's workshop, sector funds are the investor's nemesis.
几乎所有可以想象的行业都有专门的行业基金，并且可以追溯到1920年代。经过近80年的历史，证据是压倒性的。任何一年最赚钱，因此最受欢迎的行业，往往在第二年成为最差的表现者。就像闲散的手是魔鬼的攻防，行业基金是投资者的敌人。
The research on mutual fund performance is too voluminous to cite. Useful summaries and links can be found at www.investorhome.com/mutual. HTM #do. www.ssrn.com. Enter mutual fund in the search window and www.stanford.edu/washarp/art/art.htm.
2. 关于共同基金表现的研究太多，无法引用。有用的摘要和链接可以在以下网址找到：www.investorhome.com/mutual-htm-do-www.ssrn.com， 在搜索窗口输入共同基金和www.stanford.edu/art/art.htm。
3. That's not to say that these funds would have done better if their superstar managers had stayed in place. All we can be sure of is that the two funds did poorly without them.
3. 这并不是说，如果这些基金的超级明星经理留在原地，他们会做得更好。我们能确定的只是这两个基金在没有他们的情况下表现不佳。
For there's a second lesson here. To succeed, the individual investor must either avoid shopping from the same list of favorite stocks that have already been picked over by the giant institutions, or own them far more patiently. See Eric R. Siri and Peter DeFano, Costly Search and Mutual Fund Flows, The Journal of Finance, Volume 53, Number 8, October, 1998, pages 1589 to 1622, Keith C. Brown, W. V. Harlow, and Laura Starks, of Tournaments and Temptations, The Journal of Finance, Volume 51, Number 1, March, 1996, pages 85 to 110, Joseph Lakonishok, Andre Schliefer, and Robert Vishny. What do money managers do? Working paper, University of Illinois, February, 1997, Stanley Akins, Stanley Stansell, and Paul Wertheim, Institutional. Portfolio Composition, Quarterly Review of Economics and Finance, Volume 38, Number 1, Spring, 1998, pages 93 to 110, Paul Gompers and Andrew Metrick, Institutional Investors and Equity Prices. The Quarterly Journal of Economics, Volume 116, Number 1, February, 2001, pages 229 to 260.
4. 这里有第二个教训，要成功，个人投资者必须避免从已经被巨型机构挑选过的最爱股票列表中购买，或者更有耐心地持有它们。参见 Eric R. Siri 和 Peter DeFano， 昂贵的搜索和共同基金流动金融杂志第53卷第8期，1998年10月，第1589至1622页 ，Keith C. Brown、W. V. Harlow 和 Laura Starks 关于比赛和诱惑金融杂志第51卷第1期，1996年3月，第85-110页 ，Joseph Lakonishok、Andre Schliefer 和 Robert Vishny， 金钱经理做什么？工作论文，伊利诺伊大学，1997年2月 ，Stanley Akins、Stanley Stansell 和 Paul Wertheim， 机构投资组合构成，经济和金融季刊，第38卷第1期，1998年春季，第93-110页 ，Paul Gompers 和 Andrew Metrick， 机构投资者和股票价格，经济学季刊，第116卷第1期，2001年2月，第229-260页。
5. Amazingly, this illustration understates the advantage of index funds, since the database from which it is taken does not include the track records of hundreds of funds that disappeared over these periods. Measured more accurately, the advantage of indexing would be overpowering.
无令人惊讶的是，这个例子低估了指数基金的优势，因为它所取的数据库并没有包括在这些期间消失的数百个基金的跟踪记录。更准确的测量指数化的优势将是压倒性的。
6C Benjamin Graham, Memoirs of the Dean of Wall Street, Seymour Chapman, edition, McGraw-Hill, New York, 1996, page 273, and Janet Lowe, The Rediscovered Benjamin Graham. Selected writings of the Wall Street legend, John Wiley & Sons, New York, 1999, page 273. As Warren Buffett wrote in his 1996 annual report, most investors, both institutional and individual, will find that the best way to own common stocks is through an index fund that charges minimal fees. Those following this path are sure to beat the net results, after fees and expenses, delivered by the great majority of investment professionals. See www.berkshirehathaway.com/1996AR/1996.html。
6参见 Benjamin Graham 华尔街之王本杰明格雷厄姆回忆录 Seymour Chapman 编辑 McGraw-Hill 纽约1996年第273页和 Janet Lowe 被重新发现的本杰明格雷厄姆华尔街传奇的选集 John Wiley 与 Sons 纽约1999年第273页。正如沃伦巴菲特在他1996年的年度报告中写道，大多数投资者无论是机构还是个人都会发现拥有普通股的最好方式是通过一个收费最低的指数基金。遵循这条路径的人肯定会击败大多数投资专业人士提供的净结果，扣除费用和开支。参见 3w.berkshirehathaway.com/1996AR/1996.html。
7A complete listing of the S&P 500's constituent companies is available at www.standardandpoors.com.
7S 与 P500 成分公司的完整列表可以在 3w.standardandpoors.com 上找到。
8C Noel Capon, Gavin Fitzsimons, and Russ Allen Prince, An Individual-Level Analysis of the Mutual Fund Investment Decision, Journal of Financial Services Research, Volume 10, 1996, pages 59 to 82. Investment Company Institute, Understanding Shareholders' Use of Information and Advisors, Spring, 1997. At www.ici.org/pdf/rpt_undsdnd_shared.pdf, page 21. Gordon Alexander, Jonathan Jones, and Peter Nigro, Mutual Fund Shareholders. Characteristics, Investor Knowledge, and Sources of Information, OCC. Working Paper, December, 1997, at www.occ.trees.gov/ftp/workpaperwp97-13.pdf。
8参见 Noel Capon、Gavin Fitzsimons 和 Russ Allen Prince 的文章对共同基金投资决策的个体层面分析，金融服务研究杂志第10卷1996年第59-82页，投资公司协会理解股东如何使用信息和顾问1997年春季，网址为 3w.ici.org/pt/UNDSDND/share.pdf 第21页。Gordon Alexander、Jonathan Jones 和 Peter Nigro 共同基金股东特性、投资者知识和信息来源 OCC 工作论文1997年12月，网址为 3w.occ.trees.gov/ftp/workpaper/wp97-13.pdf。
9 investors can search easily for funds that meet these expense hurdles by using the fund screening tools at www.morningstar.com and http://money.cnn.com。
9投资者可以通过使用 3w.morningstar.com 和 http://money.cnn.com 上的基金筛选工具，轻松寻找满足这些费用门槛的基金。
10C Matthew Morey, Rating the Raters, An Investigation of Mutual Fund Rating Services, Journal of Investment Consulting, Volume 5, Number 2, November/December, 2002. While its star ratings are a weak predictor of future results, Morningstar is the single best source of information on funds for individual investors.
10参见 Matthew Morey 的文章评价评级者对共同基金评级服务的调查，投资咨询杂志第5卷第2期2002年12分之11月。尽管其星级评级对未来结果的预测能力较弱， 但 Morningstar 仍是个人投资者获取基金信息的最佳来源。
11. Unlike a mutual fund, a closed-end fund does not issue new shares directly to anyone who wants to buy them. Instead, an investor must buy shares not from the fund itself, but from another shareholder who is willing to part with them. Thus, the price of the shares fluctuates above and below their net asset value, depending on supply and demand.
11与共同基金不同，封闭式基金不直接向任何想要购买的人发行新股。相反，投资者必须从愿意出售股票的其他股东那里购买股票，而不是从基金本身购买。因此，股票的价格会根据供求关系在其净资产价值的上下波动。
12. For more information, see www.morningstar.com and www.etfconnect.com.
12. 更多信息，请参见 3w.morningstar.com 和 3w.etfconnect.com。
13. Unlike index mutual funds, index ETFs are subject to standard stock commissions when you buy and sell them, and these commissions are often assessed on any additional purchases or reinvested dividends. Details are available at www.ishares.com, www.streettracks.com, www.amex.com, and www.indexfunds.com.
13. 与指数共同基金不同，购买和出售指数 ETF 时需要支付标准的股票佣金，而且这些佣金通常会在任何额外的购买或在投资的股息上收取。详情请参见 3w.ishares.com、3w.streettracks.com、3w.amex.com 和 3w.indexfunds.com。
14. See Sequoia's June 30, 1999 report to shareholders at www.sequoiafund.com/reports/quarterly/semian99.htm. Sequoia has been closed to new investors since 1982, which has reinforced its superb performance.
14. 参见 Sequoia 在1999年6月30日向股东的报告 3w.sequoiafund.com/reports/quarterly/semian99.htm。 自1982年以来， Sequoia 已经对新投资者关闭，这加强了其卓越的表现。
15. Jason Zweig, What Fund Investors Really Need to Know, Money, June, 2002, pages 110 to 115.
15. Jason Zweig, 基金投资者真正需要知道的 Money, 2002年6月，第110-115页。
16. See Interview with Ellis and Jason Zweig, Wall Street's Wisest Man, Money, June, 2001, pages 49 to 52.
16. 参见 Jason Zweig 对 Ellis 的采访，华尔街最明智的人 Money, 2001年6月，第49-52页。One alternatively, you could buy back the call option, but you would have to take a loss on it, and options can have even higher trading costs than stocks. 重试错误原因。Want to put this statement in perspective? Consider how often you are likely to buy a stock at $30 and be able to sell it at $600. 重试错误原因。R. Benjamin Graham, The Intelligent Investor, Harper与 Row, 1949, p. 4。重试错误原因。3. A hedge fund is a pool of money, largely unregulated by the government, invested aggressively for wealthy clients. 4. A superb telling of the LCM story, see Roger Lowenstein, When Genius Failed, Random House, 2000. 重试错误原因。4. John Carswell, The South Sea Bubble, Crescent Press, London, 1960, pp. 131-199. Also see 3w.harvardmagazine.com/issue/mj99-md. html. 重试错误原因。5. Constance Loizos, Q 与 A, Alex Chung, Investment News, 每17 1999, p. 38. The highest 20-year return in mutual fund history was 25.8% per year, achieved by the legendary Peter Lynch of Fidelity Magellan over the 2 decades ending December 31st, 1994. Lynch's performance turned $10,000 into more than $982,000 in 20 years. Chung was predicting that his fund would turn $10,000 into more than $4 million over the same length of time. Instead of regarding Chung as ridiculously overoptimistic, investors threw money at him, flinging more than $100 million into his fund over the next year. A $10,000 investment in the Monument Internet Fund in May 1999 would have shrunk to roughly $2,000 by year-end 2004. The Monument Fund no longer exists in its original form and is now known as Orbitec's Emerging Technology Fund. 重试错误原因。6 Lisa Riley Cullen, The Triple Digit Club, Money, December, 1999, p. 170. If you had invested $10,000 in Villar's fund at the end of 1999, you would have finished 2002 with just 1,193 million, left one of the worst destructions of wealth in the history of the mutual fund industry. 重试错误原因。7c3w.the-street.com/fund-smarter-891-820.html Kramer's favorite stocks did not go higher consistently in good days and bad. By year-end 2002, one of the 10 had already gone bankrupt, and a $10,000 investment spread equally across Kramer's picks would have lost 94%, leaving you with a grand total of $597.44. Perhaps Kramer meant that his stocks would be winners not in the new world, but in the world to come. 重试错误原因。8. The only exception to this rule is an investor in the advanced stage of retirement, who may not be able to outlast a long bear market. Yet even an elderly investor should not sell her stocks merely because they have gone down in price. That approach not only turns her paper losses into real ones but deprives her heirs of the potential to inherit those stocks at lower costs for tax purposes. 重试错误原因。星号 Raskov, 1879-1950, was a director of DuPont, the giant chemical company, and chairman of the finance committee at General Motors. He also served as national chairman of the Democratic Party and was the driving force behind the construction of the Empire State Building. Calculations by finance professor Jeremy Siegel confirmed that Raskov's plan would have grown to just under $9,000 after 20 years, although inflation would have eaten away much of that gain. For the best recent look at Raskov's views on long-term stock investing, see the essay by financial advisor William Bernstein at cw.efficientfrontier.com/f-197-raskov.htm. 重试错误原因。
Graham's brief discussion is in two parts, on page 33 and pages 191 to 192. For more detail on the Dow theory, see http://viking.som.yale.edu/willdow/dowpage.html.
星号 Graham 的简短讨论分为两部分，分别在第33页和第191-192页。关于道氏理论的更多详细信息，请参见 http://viking.som.yale.edu/will-dow-page.html.
Mutual funds bought letter stock in private transactions, then immediately revalued these shares at a higher public price. See Graham's definition on page 579. That enabled these go-go funds to report unsustainably high returns in the mid-1960s. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission cracked down on this abuse in 1969, and it is no longer a concern for fund investors. Stock option warrants are explained in Chapter 16.
共同基金在私人交易中购买了信件股票，然后立即以更高的公开价格重新估值这些股票，参见 Graham 在第579页的定义。这使得这些激进基金在1960年代中期报告了不可持续的高回报。美国证券交易委员会在1969年对这种滥用行为进行了打击，现在这已不再是基金投资者的关注点。股票期权权证在第16章中有解释。
The Penn Central Transportation Company, then the biggest railroad in the United States, sought bankruptcy protection on June 21, 1970, shocking investors, who had never expected such a giant company to go under. C. For 23. Among the companies with excessive debt Graham had in mind were Timcovat and National General Corporation. See pages 425 and 463. The problem of solvency on Wall Street emerged between 1968 and 1971, when several prestigious brokerages suddenly went bust.
星号1970年6月21日，当时美国最大的铁路公司 Penn Central Transportation Co. 寻求破产保护，这让投资者震惊。他们从未预料到这样一个巨大的公司会倒闭，参见第423页。Graham 心中的债务过重的公司包括 Timcovat 和 National General Corp， 参见第425页和第463页。华尔街的偿付能力问题出现在1968年至1971年之间，当时几家知名的经纪公司突然破产。
See Chapter 2. As of the beginning of 2003, U.S. Treasury bonds maturing in 10 years yielded 3.8%, while stocks, as measured by the Dow Jones Industrial Average, yielded 1.9%. Note that this relationship is not all that different from the 1964 figures that Graham cites. The income generated by top-quality bonds has been falling steadily since 1981.
星号参见第2章。截至2003年初，美国10年期国债的收益率为 3.8%， 而股票以道琼斯工业平均指数衡量的收益率为 1.9%。注意，这种关系与 Graham 引用的1964年的数据并无太大差异。自1981年以来，优质债券产生的收入一直在稳步下降。
Air transport stocks, of course, generated as much excitement in the late 1940s and early 1950s as internet stocks did a half-century later. Among the hottest mutual funds of that era were aeronautical securities and the missiles, rockets, jets, and automation fund. They, like the stocks they owned, turned out to be an investing disaster. It is commonly accepted today that the cumulative earnings of the airline industry over its entire history have been negative. The lesson Graham is driving at is not that you should avoid buying airline stocks, but that you should never succumb to the certainty that any industry will outperform all others in the future.
星号当然，航空运输股票在20世纪40年代末和50年代初引起的热情，就像半个世纪后的互联网股票一样。那个时代最热门的共同基金包括 Aeronautical Securities 和 Missiles, Rockets, Jets 与 Automation Fund。他们就像他们拥有的股票一样，最终成为了投资的灾难。现在普遍接受的观点是，航空业在其整个历史上的累计收益是负的。Graham 想要强调的教训，不是你应该避免购买航空股票，而是你永远不应该屈服于任何行业在未来都将超越所有其他行业的确定性。
Tangible assets include a company's physical property, like real estate, factories, equipment, and inventories, as well as its financial balances, such as cash, short-term investments, and accounts receivable. Among the elements not included in tangible assets are brands, copyrights, patents, franchises, goodwill, and trademarks. To see how to calculate tangible asset value, see footnote on page 198.